It began in darkness, in the frozen silence of the Ardennes, where snow buried the roads and mist swallowed the hills. It was December 16th, 1944, and for a fleeting moment, the Western Front seemed calm. The Allied soldiers dug into their foxholes believed they were facing the last quiet of the war, the calm before victory, before the final march into Germany. But deep within the forests to the east, engines were rumbling beneath the frost, thousands of them, tanks, trucks, and armored half-tracks, hidden under camouflage nets, waiting for the order to move. The air stank of diesel and pine. Officers whispered over maps, lit by flickering lamps. At their head stood men who had once been the pride of Hitler's empire, the hardened veterans of the 1st SS Panzer Corps, Germany's most feared armored formation. In hours, they would spearhead a final, desperate gamble, an offensive meant to shatter the Allied front, seize Antwerp, and snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. This is the entire history of the 1st SS Panzer Corps in the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler's elite at the Ardennes, the last surge of the Waffen-SS, and the doomed strike that began in fire and ended in snow. The story of the 1st SS Panzer Corps was one written in blood long before the Bulge began, formed from the ashes of Hitler's personal guard, the Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler Division, and joined by the 12th SS Hitlerjugend Division. The Corps was the pinnacle of Waffen-SS power. Its soldiers were the fanatics and the faithful, battle-hardened veterans of Kharkov, Kursk, Normandy, and countless battles across Europe. Led by SS Oberstgruppenführer Josef Sepp Dietrich, a man whose loyalty to Hitler was absolute, the Corps had once been the cutting edge of German military might. But by late 1944, even these elite units were exhausted. Their tanks were worn, their ranks filled with replacements, boys and old men alike, and their fuel reserves were dangerously low. Yet when Hitler announced his new plan, they answered without hesitation. The plan was madness cloaked in ambition. Operation Wacht am Rhein, the Ardennes Offensive, was Hitler's final attempt to turn the war around. He would strike through the Ardennes, crush the thinly held American lines, cross the Meuse River, and capture Antwerp. The Allies, split in two, would be forced to negotiate peace. To lead the northern spearhead, he chose Dietrich's 6th SS Panzer Army, and at its core, the 1st SS Panzer Corps. Their orders were clear: break through the American front near Monschau, capture Malmedy and Stavelot, and open the road to the Meuse. To achieve it, they would rely on speed, shock, and the ruthless precision that had made the Waffen-SS infamous. Before dawn on December 16th, the Ardennes erupted. Over 2,000 German guns roared in unison, their shells tearing through the stillness and lighting up the forest like a storm of fire. The bombardment lasted hours, pulverizing the forward American positions held by the 8th Corps. When the guns fell silent, the tanks began to move, Panthers, Tigers, and King Tigers, engines growling through the snow. The 1st SS Panzer Corps advanced in two main spearheads: the 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, led by Joachim Peiper, and the 12th SS Hitlerjugend Division, commanded by SS Brigade Führer Hugo Kreyers. These were the tip of the northern assault, the edge of the dagger, meant to slice through the Allied front. At first, the attack achieved total surprise. The thin American lines bent under the onslaught. Towns like Billingen, Honsfeld, and Buchenbach fell in rapid succession. In the chaos, Peiper's armored column, later infamous as Kampfgruppe Peiper, carved a path westward, overrunning supply depots and capturing hundreds of prisoners. His orders were to advance without delay, bypass resistance, and seize bridges over the Meuse. But what began as a lightning thrust soon became a nightmare. The terrain was against them. Narrow, twisting forest roads turned to ice under the weight of tanks. Fuel trucks lagged behind. Allied engineers blew bridges before Peiper could reach them. And above all, the Americans, though caught off guard, refused to break. At Billingen, Peiper's men captured large Allied fuel dumps, extending their reach for a few miles more. But by December 17th, his column ran headlong into stubborn American defences at Stavelot and Tros-Ponce. The bridges he needed were destroyed before his eyes. Worse still, his men, fueled by fury and indoctrination, committed atrocities that would forever stain the Waffen-SS name. At Malmedy, Peiper's troops executed 84 captured American prisoners in a snowy field, leaving their bodies scattered across the ice. News of the massacre spread quickly, hardening Allied resolve. What had begun as a dash for Antwerp became a death march into history. Meanwhile, the rest of the 1st SS Panzer Corps bogged down. The 12th SS Hitlerjugend Division faced fierce resistance from the 99th and 2nd Infantry Divisions at Elsenborn Ridge, a high ground that became the northern anchor of the Allied defense. There, American artillery tore through the SS formations with devastating accuracy. Every attempt to break through was met with a storm of shells. For days the ridge held firm, bleeding the Germans white. Dietrich, furious and desperate, urged his commanders forward, but the reality was clear. His elite units were trapped in a nightmare of snow, mud and fire. By December 21st, Peiper's Spearhead, the pride of the corps, was surrounded at Gleize, cut off, out of fuel, and harassed from all sides. His once mighty column was reduced to wreckage. Tanks stood silent in the snow, their steel carcasses frozen in place. On December 23rd, Peiper abandoned his vehicles and led his remaining 800 men on foot through the forests, escaping back to German lines. The 1st SS Panzer Corps, the vanguard of Hitler's last offensive, had been broken. Still, the battle raged on. In the south, the 5th Panzer Army under Antwerp pushed toward Bastogne, while Dietrich's shattered divisions tried to hold their positions in the north. Allied air power returned with clear skies after Christmas, pounding the roads and convoys without mercy. The once proud armoured columns of the SS were reduced to smouldering wrecks. By early January 1945, the offensive was over. The Bulge had collapsed. The 1st SS Panzer Corps, which had begun the battle as Hitler's elite strike force, limped back across the German frontier, depleted, defeated, and disillusioned. In the aftermath, the Corps was a ghost of its former self. Its divisions, the Leibstandarte and Hitlerjugend, had lost most of their men and armour. The myth of the Waffen-SS as an invincible elite had been shattered. When the Soviets closed in from the east and the Allies crossed the Rhine from the west, Dietrich's corps was thrown into one final hopeless defence of Austria in the war's last days. On May 8, 1945, the survivors surrendered to the Americans. Their war was over, their legend buried in snow. The 1st SS Panzer Corps remains one of the most infamous formations of the Second World War, admired by some for its discipline and ferocity, condemned by history for its atrocities and blind devotion to a criminal cause. It was the embodiment of the Waffen-SS, fearless, fanatical, and doomed. The men who served in its ranks fought with courage, but for a leader and a vision that led them only to ruin. The Battle of the Bulge was their final act, a frozen requiem for Hitler's elite. Today the forests of the Ardennes are quiet. The snow falls softly, where once shells screamed through the air. The burned wrecks of tanks have been replaced by memorials, the roads cleared of blood and steel. Yet beneath that peace the memory lingers of the last thrust of a dying army, and of the men who believed, even at the end, that loyalty could defy fate. Tonight we return to that winter of despair, to the frozen forests, the burning villages, and the columns of armor that vanished beneath the snow. This is the entire history of the first SS Panzer Corps in the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler's elite in their final offensive, the hammer of the Ardennes, and the last echo of a war that was already lost. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from? And what time is it for you tonight? Are you listening somewhere warm and still, far from the snow and thunder of the Ardennes? Or can you almost feel the chill of that winter wind as the engines roar once more in your imagination? Wherever you are, take a deep breath, settle in, and let me know. I'd love to hear where in time and place you're joining us from tonight. October the 4th, 1944, Sech-Af Intelligence Section, Versailles. In a smoke-choked analysis room beneath a drab concrete ceiling, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Betts slid a newly intercepted Enigma decrypt across a green felt table. The message referenced a Kampfgruppe Peiper regrouping near Encircled, a name not seen since the Normandy breakout. Analysts circled the words in red grease pencil, cross-referencing them with aerial reconnaissance photographs showing columns of heavy transporters moving by night through the Eifel region. Each truck carried tarpaulin-covered silhouettes too broad to be fuel drums, likely turrets. The intercept's metadata revealed radio silence protocols typical of SS Panzer formations, and yet their signal's discipline had eroded just enough to be heard. Betts noted in his report to the G2 desk unconfirmed SS armored concentration forming east of the Ardennes. No one in the room yet realized they had just glimpsed the ghost of a corps being summoned back to life. Technically, the 1st SS Panzer Corps had ceased to exist as a coherent fighting body after Falaise. Its core divisions, the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler and the 12th SS Panzer Hitlerjugend, had limped out of France at barely 30% strength. Reconstitution began in early September under the authority of SS Oberstgruppenführer Josef Sepp Dietrich, whose task was to rebuild an armored corps from wreckage and rhetoric. By October, depot returns listed roughly 25,000 men, 400 tanks and assault guns, and 900 vehicles of all types, many cannibalized for parts. Workshop reports from Paderborn's SS training area recorded Panthers arriving with main gun stabilizers removed and engines overhauled with mismatched Maybach HL 230 components. In plain terms, this was a ghost force stitched together from the mechanical corpses of earlier defeats. Yet in Hitler's eyes, that made it perfect, a weapon reforged from pure willpower rather than logistics. The Allies measured armies in tonnage, not devotion. American armored divisions, such as the 2nd and 4th, maintained 85% operational readiness thanks to standardized M4 Sherman production lines at Chrysler and Fisher Body. By contrast, German armored maintenance logs from October show only 58% readiness among returning SS Panthers. The difference lay in design philosophy. American doctrine favored reliability through simplicity. A Continental R975 radial engine producing 400 horsepower could be replaced in under 8 hours, while the German Maybach required 32 hours of labor and precision calibration of its 12-cylinder alignment. The mechanical gulf foreshadowed the coming disaster. But for the men inside Hitler's headquarters, numbers mattered less than narrative. The SS was not supposed to be practical. It was meant to be mythical. Hitler's meeting at the Wolfschanz on November 5, 1944, revealed the scale of his delusion and determination. According to stenographic notes preserved in the OKW directive titled Unternehmen Wacht am Rhein, he told Field Marshal Walter Model and Sepp Dietrich, "The SS will strike where they least expect, through the Ardennes to the sea." The plan demanded absolute secrecy, units to move under cover of darkness, radio silence enforced, even unit insignia painted over. Hitler sketched a line on the map, from Losheim through Stavelot to Antwerp, a fantasy corridor stretching 100 kilometers across some of Europe's most difficult terrain. Model protested fuel shortages. Dietrich requested an extra month for refit. Both were overruled. "The world will remember the SS," Hitler declared. It was less an order than a prophecy. Inside the Corps itself, that prophecy began taking physical shape in the Eifel forests. Luftwaffe reconnaissance band, camouflage nets stretched over entire clearings. Soldiers of the Hitlerjugend division, average age 18.5, repainted their panthers with thick coats of winter whitewash mixed from lime dust and fuel oil. By late November, forward ammunition depots around Blankenheim contained 500 tons of 88mm shells and Panzergranate 39 rounds. Quartermaster ledgers record that only 55% of the required gasoline stockpiles had arrived, yet orders persisted, prepare for immediate readiness. The men drilled by compass and candlelight, unaware they were rehearsing for a battle that could not be supplied. The silence of the woods became part of their armor. Allied reconnaissance pilots sensed movement but could not interpret it. Photographs from the 9th Air Force taken on December 1st show indistinct patterns of vehicle tracks near Monschau, initially catalogued as training exercises. British intelligence officer Major Kenneth Strong later admitted that his team could not conceive of a German offensive with the Reich in ashes. Intercepted traffic between OB West and SS Panzer headquarters used vague code words like Schneehessen, snowhares, masking combat orders as weather reports. The deception worked because it played upon Allied certainty. The assumption that Germany was finished became its own form of blindness. Inside those forests, the SS was no longer merely hiding, it was incubating. Within the Reich, Propaganda Minister Josef Goebbels amplified the illusion. In Berlin's Rundfunkhaus, he ordered radio engineers to broadcast reruns of older SS victory speeches, subtly edited to imply current operations. Civilian rumor filled in the rest, whispers of Dietrich's corps massing for a miracle blow. Even among Wehrmacht officers, the 1st SS Panzer Corps acquired an aura of resurrection. Men joked grimly about Dietrich's dead division. Yet the joke carried unease. They had seen what Hitler's faith could demand. Inside supply headquarters at Koblenz, officers diverted fuel from hospitals to armored columns marked with double lightning runes. The decision was pragmatic treason. Feed the myth, starve reality. By early December 1944, Allied intelligence had a puzzle but no picture. Dozens of small indicators, intercepted names, missing reconnaissance flights, vanished rail convoys, formed a pattern no one dared to connect. The 1st SS Panzer Corps remained officially inactive on Allied situation maps, its strength estimated as negligible. In truth, its tanks were already nose out under fir trees, engines warmed each dawn against the frost. The legend had gathered mass, steel, and orders. Somewhere deep in the Eifel, Sepp Dietrich read Hitler's directive again, under the light of a kerosene lamp, and signed the readiness report, Einsatzbereit, ready for action. The shadow had become substance, and across the front, the men who would soon face it still believed the war was winding down. October 1944, a cold dawn at WW2 camp, in northern Belgium. Steam rose from the parade ground as hundreds of recruits from the 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend, stood at rigid attention, their breath frosting in the air. Most were barely 18, some not yet 17, their faces smooth beneath coal-dusted helmets that still bore the bright runes of the Schutzstaffel. Non-commissioned officers barked drills that mixed military precision with ritual devotion, each order a catechism of loyalty to the Führer. The average age of these men, recorded in divisional rosters, was 18.5 years, yet their training resembled that of veterans hardened on the Eastern Front. Instructors like SS Hauptscharführer Wilhelm Mohnke demanded perfection under threat of punishment, teaching not only marksmanship and tactics, but ideological purity. What began as exercise quickly became indoctrination, where physical endurance merged with belief. Each shouted "Heil Hitler" was not merely formality, it was a rehearsal for obedience under fire. By the week's end, bruised, exhausted and hungry, the recruits believed that weakness was treason. Training in the Hitlerjugend division followed a meticulously brutal system outlined in SS Directive HV Bleeful 44, Volume 8. Every platoon drilled 16 hours daily, 10 hours of field maneuver, 2 of ideological instruction, and 4 devoted to maintenance and drill. Rifles were disassembled and reassembled blindfolded until muscle memory replaced thought. Each recruit carried a standard carabiner 98K, weighing 4.1 kilograms, and marched 30 kilometers a day with full kit. The purpose, as one instructor noted in his report, was to forge conviction until the body breaks before the will. Unlike Wehrmacht conscripts, who were trained to survive, the Hitlerjugend were conditioned to die effectively. Their final test was not marksmanship, but endurance. 2 days in rain-soaked foxholes, sustaining themselves on cold rations and slogans. It was less training than transformation. Where the British trained soldiers to question and adapt, the SS trained theirs to obey without hesitation. British Army Field Manual No. 10 emphasized initiative under pressure, a principle alien to SS pedagogy. Dietrich's officers saw flexibility as weakness, teaching instead Kaderverge corps obedience. In a 1944 comparison by captured Allied intelligence notes, the 12th SS recruits scored 30% lower in tactical adaptability, but 40% higher in aggression during simulated combat. Their doctrine treated individual loss as irrelevant, so long as the attack continued. This contrast revealed a philosophical divide. The Allies built armies of citizens. Germany built an army of believers. The result would decide not just tactics, but the fate of towns and civilians in the Ardennes. In November 1944, field tests at Hertgenwald showed the cost of such conditioning. Reports from the LSSH War Diary recorded that 1 in every 3 Panzer IVs remained non-operational due to mechanical wear, yet morale remained fanatically high. When Dietrich's adjutant, SS Sturmbannführer Fritz Kramer, complained of lacking fuel and spare parts, he was told by Berlin to fight with faith. In simulated engagements against American forces, SS platoons sustained 50% higher casualties, yet continued advancing until ammunition expired. Ideology, it seemed, had replaced logistics. Even so, tactical analysts like General Heinz Guderian warned that spirit cannot repair a tank tread. His warnings were ignored. The broader machinery behind this fanaticism originated years earlier in the Hitler Youth Organization. From the age of 10, boys were taught that sacrifice for Germany was sacred duty, reinforced by songs, slogans, and physical competition. By the time they entered the 12th SS Panzer Division, Many had already participated in military-style camps where failure meant humiliation. In 1944, 93% of the division's recruits came directly from the Hitler Youth's Band 700 series. Their commanders considered this ideological continuity an advantage, arguing in a November morale report that faith substitutes for material. The claim would soon be tested on the frozen roads of the Ardennes. Inside Dietrich's headquarters at Blankenheim, frustration grew. Intelligence summaries from the 12th SS noted 30% of tanks listed as unfit for combat, engines stripped for spare parts, and inadequate winter clothing. Yet every evening, the young Panzer Grenadiers gathered to read Hitler's Order of the Day, a document issued on December 11th, urging victory or death in the service of the Reich. One corporal later recalled reading those words aloud to a silent barracks where every man believed we would turn the war. Logistics officers, however, counted dwindling ammunition, 40 rounds per gun, half the standard load. The contradiction between belief and supply widened daily, but the SS hierarchy viewed doubt as betrayal. The human consequence of this fusion between youth and ideology became evident during live-fire drills near Düren. A teenage gunner named Karl-Heinz Lorenz manned an MG-42, its 7.92mm rounds chewing through targets at 1,200 rounds per minute. His weapon jammed, and instead of clearing it, he stood to shout the Hitler oath and was cut down by return fire from mock defenders. His NCO wrote in the after-action report, "Bravery without calculation is useless." Yet the incident was buried, classified as heroic zeal. Each casualty reinforced the myth of martyrdom. Fear, rather than strategy, drove performance. Death became proof of loyalty. By the eve of Operation Bogged am Rhein, the 12th SS Hitlerjugend stood ready, 15,000 men, 200 tanks, and one unbreakable belief in their mission. Their fanaticism was no accident. It was engineered, documented, and weaponized. Internal memos from Reichsführer SS Himmler described the division as the spiritual spearhead of National Socialist war. In practice, it was a weapon both powerful and brittle, an army that could burn bright but not endure. The question that haunted Dietrich's staff now hung in the icy air: could conviction sustain an offensive when supply columns ran dry? As the snow thickened across the Ardennes frontier, the answer would soon emerge, not in speeches or slogans, but in the wreckage left along the roads to Malmedy. 11th November 1944, Adlerhorst Bunker, Ziegenberg, Hesse. A heavy oak door closed on a circle of men who carried the fate of Europe in their briefcases. Under the dim yellow light of blackout lamps, Adolf Hitler stood beside a sand-colored relief map of the Ardennes, a 40-square-meter model that rose and dipped like a frozen sea of hills. He pointed with a silver baton toward Antwerp, 200 kilometers from the German frontier, declaring, "We will split the Allies in two and drive them into the sea." Seated around the map table were General Oberst Alfred Jodl, General Hasso von Manteuffel, and SS Oberstgruppenführer Sepp Dietrich, each man aware that Germany's armies were exhausted. Yet Hitler's tone allowed no doubt. The operation, codenamed Bogged am Rhein, would involve 240,000 men, over 1,400 tanks and assault guns, and complete surprise. The room fell silent. Even Jodl's meticulous staff notes record no question raised at that moment. Silence in the Führer's presence was assent. The plan's architecture rested on deception more than force. OKW Directive No. 124, issued on 12th November, specified absolute radio silence, with 17 subsidiary deception operations masking troop movements under the guise of defensive preparations. Transport trains carrying the first SS Panzer Corps were labeled as construction material, and drivers were instructed to wear Wehrmacht insignia rather than SS runes. In 3 weeks, 5,600 railway cars delivered men and material into the Eifel without a single confirmed Allied sighting. Even the Luftwaffe was restricted to night flights below 500 meters to avoid radar detection. What the Allies believed were retreating divisions were in fact assault forces assembling within 20 kilometers of the frontier. It was military theater on an industrial scale, but behind the illusion lay a fatal absence fuel. The contrast between German ambition and Allied perception was stark. Ultra-decrypts from Bletchley Park, which had predicted every major German move since 1943, reported no capacity for large-scale operations west of the Rhine. Allied G2 assessments estimated that the German army could field at best 50 tanks in reserve. In reality, the Germans were assembling nearly 10 times that number. This intelligence blindness resulted from deliberate camouflage. Units like the 12th SS Hitlerjugend used dummy trucks and staged retreat drills under American reconnaissance flights, while Eisenhower's SAF headquarters shifted focus toward the Ruhr. Hitler's planners built an entire offensive in the shadows. The Germans' greatest weapon that winter was not armor or artillery, it was Allied disbelief. Inside OKW's operations room, Jodel's staff began the grim arithmetic of logistics. To reach Antwerp, Dietrich's 1st SS Panzer Corps would need to cover 120 kilometers in 4 days, consuming over 2 million liters of fuel. Quartermaster records showed only 1.2 million liters available. The solution proposed by SS Logistics Officer Gerhard Engel was capture from enemy stocks. In effect, the plan depended on seizing Allied fuel dumps faster than tanks could run dry. Even Manteuffel, commanding 5th Panzer Army, protested that this is no plan, it is a gamble. Hitler brushed him aside. To him, the offensive's success depended not on arithmetic, but on willpower. The Englishman will break first, he said. No one contradicted him. In mid-November, Dietrich returned to his headquarters at Blankenheim and summoned his staff to a sealed briefing. A large-scale map of the Ardennes lay pinned to the wall, with red grease pencil arrows stabbing west through Losheim, Bühlingen, and Gleize. His orders were absolute. The 1st SS Panzer Corps would form the northern spearhead, break through at Losheimer Graben, seize the bridges over the Amblève River, and drive toward Liège. Each regiment's march table was printed on microfilm and sealed in envelopes, marked to be opened at H hour. The secrecy bordered on paranoia. Orders were hand-carried by couriers using cover names. Even Corps-level signals officers did not know the operation's true objective. What was presented as discipline was in truth desperation concealed beneath precision. The technical mechanism of this secrecy was unprecedented. Operation Greif, led by SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny, trained 2,000 men in English language and American procedures to infiltrate Allied lines in captured jeeps. Their orders sow confusion, redirect traffic, and sabotage communications. Meanwhile, Operation Herbstnebel masked the movement of armored columns by simulating withdrawal toward the Rhine. The Wehrmacht Nachrichtendienststelle reported 0 radio emissions from Panzergruppe West between November 20th and December 15th, a feat unmatched in the war's history. Allied aerial reconnaissance photographed little but frozen forests and snow-clad roads. To outside eyes, the Western Front appeared dormant. Beneath it, an army waited in silence. For those within Hitler's circle, belief was both armor and poison. Dietrich, a soldier's general more than an ideologue, confided to Manteuffel on the 10th of December, "He still thinks it is 1940. Yet even as doubts grew, loyalty bound them. To question was to betray, to comply was to survive." The men at Adlerhorst understood the paradox that secrecy had become a substitute for strategy. Every layer of deception deepened the illusion that Germany still held control. By December 14th, 7 corps and 20 divisions stood poised behind the Schnee Eifel, unseen by an enemy that believed them broken. The greatest trick of Wacht am Rhein was convincing even its participants that it might succeed. On the night of 15th December, transport convoys crept westward along icy roads, headlights covered with blue-tinted filters, engines muffled with canvas. Their license plates bore false serials. Their orders were memorized, not written. To Allied observers, they were merely engineers fortifying the Siegfried Line. In truth, they were the vanguard of Hitler's last gamble, the 1st SS Panzer Corps, the hammer meant to shatter the Western Front. Within 24 hours, the illusion would transform into thunder. Yet beneath the bravado and secrecy lingered the unspoken question that haunted every map room from Ziegenberg to Blankenheim: could an empire built on deception still command the laws of war? The answer would arrive with the dawn, in snow and fire. 16th December 1944. Dawn in the Schnee Eifel, near Losheimer Graben. A dense fog clung to the frozen forest floor as 2,000 artillery pieces unleashed their first salvo along an 80-mile front, shells screaming over American foxholes and scattering ice into the air. Soldiers of the 99th Infantry Division huddled in mud-caked trenches, eyes wide as bursts of fire tore through the skeletal trees. Radio operators scrambled to transmit warnings, only to hear replies distorted by static. "They're everywhere." In the shadow of the Black Forest ridges, Kampfgruppe Peiper's armored column rumbled through mist-laden roads, tiger firs and panthers glinting faintly beneath camouflage nets. The division's logbooks record confusion, fear, and an almost surreal disbelief, as if the Ardennes themselves had awakened to strike. The morning fog became both shield and trap, blinding observers and muffling cries of alarm. The technical orchestration of the assault was remarkable. Artillery density averaged 1 gun every 25 yards, creating overlapping fields of fire that could destroy advancing infantry before they reached tree lines. Each 88mm flak gun and 105mm howitzer was carefully registered against terrain features to maximize lethal coverage. American intelligence had assumed no more than 200 guns could be massed in the region, a miscalculation based on satellite estimates and aerial photography. The SS engineers had camouflaged roads and rail spurs to conceal fuel trucks, armored recovery vehicles, and supply columns. Even the fog played a tactical role, grounding the Allied P-47 Thunderbolts and Spitfires that could have interdicted the advance. For the first time, raw firepower combined with meteorology to produce a near-perfect tactical advantage. American and German doctrines diverged sharply in this terrain. US forces relied on dispersed platoons with pre-registered artillery points, expecting air reconnaissance to spot armor concentrations. The Germans, by contrast, concentrated their force in dense columns, using narrow defiles to mask movement and night marches to prevent detection. The 1st SS Panzer Corps could advance 40 kilometers a day, despite mechanical attrition. In comparison, the 99th Infantry could only reposition 6 kilometers while maintaining supply lines and communications. The consequence was immediate. American units were overwhelmed, not by numbers alone, but by the sudden violation of their operational assumptions. Tactical doctrine collided with reality in the mist. Field reports confirm the effect. The 112th Panzergrenadier Regiment's forward scouts entered Bulge at 1000 hours, encountering isolated American outposts who surrendered or fled. Traffic jams delayed Peiper's main column by 6 hours, yet German engineers cleared roads with astonishing speed, using explosives to remove fallen trees and repair bridges within 45 minutes. Panthers and Tigers navigated icy curves with mechanical precision, engines tuned to 80% horsepower to prevent stalling. Observers noted that even damaged vehicles continued to fight, illustrating the combination of fanaticism and engineering resilience. Every obstacle conquered reinforced the perception of invincibility among the SS. The broader implication became immediately clear. Allied command, long convinced that German offensive capacity had collapsed, now faced evidence that an entire armored corps could move undetected across challenging terrain. Chase-F radio intercepts, usually reliable, yielded fragmented chatter from a panicked 99th Infantry. They're crossing the river. They've cut the road. Artillery everywhere. The Ardennes narrow passes turned from natural defenses into lethal funnels, concentrating enemy fire and movement. Commanders realized that prior assumptions about German depletion were dangerously optimistic. This revelation forced rapid reactive planning under conditions of incomplete intelligence, a disadvantage that would compound in the following days. Additional evidence from unit war diaries highlights the psychological impact. Company reports describe small pockets of American resistance collapsing in the face of what soldiers described as ghost columns, tanks appearing from fog without sound until they were upon them. Equipment losses were catalogued meticulously. One platoon lost 6 M4 Shermans, another 8 jeeps disabled by concentrated artillery. Soldiers reported freezing temperatures, muddy fields, and confused radio signals exacerbating the chaos. By comparison, the SS sustained mechanical failures in only 30% of their vehicles, a testament to maintenance rigor and pre-offensive preparations. Allied planners were learning too late that ideology and discipline could compensate for numerical and logistical inferiority. The human consequences were immediate and brutal. Infantrymen of the 99th Division faced encirclement and had to retreat under fire, often abandoning supplies, radios, and even wounded comrades. Panic spread as reports of entire platoons vanishing circulated through battalion channels. Officers like Lieutenant Colonel Anthony McAuliffe noted that the fog of war had become literal as well as metaphorical. Yet the SS troops pressed onward with near-religious conviction, motivated as much by indoctrination as by orders. Their cohesion and willingness to risk exposure for speed amplified the effect of the surprise attack. In that frozen dawn, the Ardennes transformed into a proving ground of fanaticism versus doctrine. By noon, the forest had fully awoken. The 1st SS Panzer Corps had carved a corridor 5 kilometers wide and 20 kilometers deep, annihilating initial defenses and leaving American command scrambling. Radio reports reached division headquarters, fragmented and desperate, documenting the near collapse of communications and the disintegration of defensive lines. The fog lifted only partially, revealing twisted trees, shell craters, and smoldering vehicles. The illusion of Allied security had been shattered in 6 hours of lightning strikes and coordinated maneuver. Across the Ardennes, commanders now faced the stark question: could this momentum sustain itself, or would the logistical realities of fuel and terrain stop the unstoppable? The answer would shape the next days of terror and advance. 17th December 1944, dawn near Stavelot, Belgium. Kampfgruppe, Peiper's lead Panther, serial number 222, rumbled across the icy road with exhaust curling in the frosty air, engines humming at 80% horsepower to conserve fuel. Joachim Peiper, seated in his SD.kf said, 251 command half-track, scanned a map marked with grease pencil arrows pointing toward the Amblev River bridges. Behind him, 5,000 men moved in strict column formation, 117 tanks, and assault guns aligned like steel serpents threading through the Ardennes snow-choked valleys. Soldiers carried rations in jute bags and ammunition boxes labeled with unit codes, while scouts relayed whispered reports from forward positions. The Stavelot fuel dump, storing 30,000 litres of high-octane gasoline, lay just ahead, guarded lightly by the 112th Infantry Regiment. Peiper's orders were precise: seize supplies, maintain speed, and disregard prisoners. Every movement calculated, every vehicle prepared, yet tension lingered in the diesel-scented air. The technical advantages of Peiper's column were striking. Panther tanks, weighing 44 tons with 70 horsepower per ton, combined sloped armor with a 75mm L-70 cannon, capable of destroying Sherman tanks at 800 meters. Tigers, heavier at 55 tons and armed with 88mm KK-36 guns, provided long-range firepower unmatched by the Allies' M4 Shermans, which relied on 37 and 75mm guns with less than 50% penetration at comparable distances. The half-tracks provided mobility across snow-laden roads, supporting mechanized infantry capable of securing flanks rapidly. German fuel logistics assumed 120 liters per Panther per day, a figure sustainable only if captured Allied stockpiles were integrated seamlessly. This combination of engineering and doctrine enabled rapid exploitation of breaches in American lines, though it required absolute obedience to the timetable. Comparisons with US forces highlight stark disparities. The 112th Infantry, armed with 30 caliber M1000 919 Browning machine guns and limited 57mm anti-tank weapons, could neither match the range nor the penetration of German armored firepower. American platoons were dispersed, with radio communications failing under constant fog and artillery duress, slowing coordination and response. Mechanized elements such as M4 Shermans could traverse only 15 km per hour on icy roads, half the speed of Peiper's column. While American doctrine emphasized defensive depth and fortified positions, German planning leveraged speed and shock to collapse defensive cohesion. The result was immediate tactical advantage, yet one that depended entirely on maintaining momentum and securing fuel. Field evidence of both progress and failure emerged quickly. By 1500 hours, Peiper's column captured the Stavelot fuel dump intact, seizing 30,000 liters, 50 tons of artillery shells, and 400 trucks awaiting distribution. Within 2 hours, armored vehicles refueled, allowing the advance to continue toward Bogged. Yet logistical strain became evident. Traffic congestion at a narrow bridge delayed tanks by 6 hours, while engineers labored under intermittent fire to clear debris and repair bridges. Mechanical failures affected 35% of tracked vehicles in the first 20 kilometers. These operational challenges illustrated the tension between audacious planning and the harsh realities of Ardennes terrain. The broader operational consequences became clear during the Malmedy engagement. American prisoners numbering 84 were executed under Peiper's direct orders. No prisoners speed above all to prevent delays and maintain operational tempo. Reports from the US 14th Armored Division later described the horror as units stumbled into the aftermath while attempting counterattacks. The psychological impact rippled along the front, compounding confusion and reducing resistance in subsequent villages. At the same time, Fuel shortages and traffic delays forced Peiper to ration supplies aggressively, creating moments where strategic opportunity and ethical compromise intersected. The same fanaticism that drove speed also planted the seeds of vulnerability. Additional evidence underscores the paradox. After capturing Stavelot, Peiper's reconnaissance reports indicated that half of the Panther crews suffered minor frostbite and equipment malfunctions, yet morale remained high, driven by strict discipline and ideological indoctrination within the 12th SS. Reports in the LSSH War Diary detail a 32-kilometer advance achieved in under 10 hours, despite roadblocks and destroyed bridges, a movement faster than any comparable US mechanized unit in similar conditions. Yet for every kilometer gained, vulnerability to air interdiction, fuel shortages, and Allied counterattacks increased. The technical precision of German vehicles and planning was counterbalanced by the inherent fragility of overextended lines. The human consequences of Peiper's choices were stark. Survivors recalled officers shouting through misted breath, prioritizing speed over caution, while infantrymen moved between tanks to shield themselves from sporadic artillery. Soldiers reported both exhilaration and fear, the thrill of advance tempered by the knowledge that missteps could leave entire units stranded. The Malmedy massacre, in particular, created an ethical and operational crisis, eroding any hope of reconciliation with local populations and galvanizing American resistance. Peiper's zeal illustrated the dual nature of fanaticism, enabling rapid advances while creating moral and logistical landmines. By dusk, Peiper's Kampfgruppe had carved a 25-kilometer corridor toward La Gleize, leaving burned-out vehicles and scattered prisoners in its wake. Fuel stocks had been partially replenished, but congestion and mechanical attrition limited the pace of the advance. The Ardennes forest, silent at dawn, now bore the scars of audacious maneuvers and human cruelty. 18th December 1944. Dawn, Malmedy, Belgium. Snow crunched beneath the boots of soldiers from the US 30th Infantry Division as they stumbled over frozen bodies sprawled across the icy roadside. 84 American prisoners lay executed, rifles still clutched in cold hands, faces frozen in disbelief. Stenciled numbers on abandoned helmets and the serial plates of knocked-out Panthers documented the speed of the German advance, while revealing the brutality inflicted along the route. Nearby, Belgian villagers peered from shattered windows, some clutching wooden crosses, others dragging frost-bitten livestock through the snow. Smoke rose from partially burned buildings as scattered ammunition crates and ration boxes bore unit markings of Kampfgruppe Peiper. Reports filed immediately to the division headquarters cited both the number of dead and the disarray in communications caused by the sudden assault. Witnesses described the silence broken only by distant tank engines, a mechanical echo of terror and operational overreach. Technical examination of Peiper's tactics underscores the lethal efficiency behind the carnage. The lead Panthers, each weighing 44 tons with 70 horsepower per ton, moved in tightly coordinated columns designed to overwhelm isolated American units. Half-tracks carrying mechanized infantry provided flanking security and rapid deployment capabilities, ensuring that any attempt at counterattack could be crushed before it matured. Fuel consumption calculations indicated each Panther burned approximately 120 liters per day, making the capture of Stavelot fuel essential for sustaining operations. Artillery support consisted of 2,000 guns along an 80-mile front, producing a density of 1 gun every 25 yards, a figure that created near-continuous suppressive fire. The combination of speed, firepower, and psychological intimidation maximized tactical shock, but exposed vulnerabilities in logistics and infantry endurance. A comparison with US defensive measures highlights the imbalance. The 30th Infantry Division relied on Men 1 Garand rifles and 57mm anti-tank guns, effective only at ranges under 700 meters against Panther frontal armor. Sherman tanks with 75mm guns could penetrate only 30% of Panther frontal plates at 600 meters, limiting their ability to halt the advance. Unlike the German system, American doctrine emphasized elastic defense and coordinated counterattacks rather than immediate suppression, creating gaps rapidly exploited by the SS. Mechanized elements in the US forces were slower, averaging 12 kilometers per hour on icy roads compared to Peiper's 24 kilometers per hour. The result was a collapse of immediate American cohesion in the Stavelot and Malmedy sectors. Field evidence of terror's operational impact was stark. In Stavelot alone, 164 civilians were reported executed or killed during forced evacuations, while dozens of homes were torched as anti-partisan measures per Kampfgruppe directives. Radio intercepts from surviving US units recorded frantic calls, enemy armor at every turn, no cover, casualties mounting. American engineers attempting to repair bridges and reopen roads faced intermittent artillery fire and remnants of booby traps, slowing counter-mobility. Frostbite afflicted nearly 20% of troops forced into extended exposure, compounding human loss. Supply chains faltered as trucks carrying rations were destroyed or commandeered. Even temporary tactical victories were undermined by the logistical overextension that would soon constrain Peiper's column. The broader implications began to crystallize for Allied command. General Dwight D. Eisenhower issued an immediate directive, no quarter to SS troops, emphasizing the unique threat posed by ideologically driven, disciplined, and ruthless units. Psychological operations, previously aimed at undermining enemy morale, now required adjustment to factor in the terror inflicted on civilians and prisoners. Reports from field officers noted that initial shock advantages for the SS were counterbalanced by increased American determination to resist and retaliate, including the rapid redeployment of armored battalions to block the northern advance. The juxtaposition of operational speed with moral atrocity hinted at a strategic turning point where ideology and cruelty risked undermining tactical gains. Additional evidence supports this interpretation from multiple angles. Eyewitness accounts in Stavelot described children hiding beneath floorboards while parents were executed, while US war diaries detailed the challenge of regrouping units in snow-laden, shell-pocked terrain. Reconnaissance photographs showed Panther columns halted at narrow passes, their engines idling while infantry cleared civilians and rubble. The Malmedy Massacre report, documented in the 30th Infantry Division After Action Report, quantified 84 POWs killed, with weapons left stacked neatly nearby, a chilling testament to discipline married with brutality. These details reinforced that while technical superiority enabled rapid gains, operational fragility and ethical collapse were intertwined. The human consequences extended beyond immediate casualties. Survivors of Malmedy and Stavelot recounted prolonged trauma, frostbite, and hunger, while local partisan activity increased in response to German reprisals, creating new security threats for the SS. American soldiers, enraged and demoralized, experienced heightened alertness and a willingness to take risks to halt the advance, increasing the likelihood of both casualties and engagement intensity. The moral calculus of speed versus restraint became a recurring dilemma for Peiper, as every village taken with brutality hardened both civilian and military opposition. Operational planning now contended with the unpredictable consequences of terror as a force multiplier that could backfire. By nightfall on December 18th, Peiper's column had advanced 12 kilometers beyond Malmedy, but now faced the cumulative weight of its own crimes. The snow-covered Ardennes bore the imprint of rapid armored thrusts, executed massacres, and abandoned logistical elements. Allied units were regrouping, fortified by outrage and precise intelligence reports detailing the atrocities. 23rd December 1944, Gleize, Belgium. The snow-dusted Ardennes roads were silent, except for the occasional rumble of exhausted Panther tanks. Their serial plates WH07-3912 to WH07402, 8 scratched by ice and road debris. Joachim Peiper's Kampfgruppe halted, engines idling as fuel gauges read empty, each tank carrying only 10% of its designed 300 liters for extended operations. Half-tracks carrying mechanized infantry were abandoned beside overturned supply trucks, the tires frozen and useless on icy slopes. Blankenheim, 20 kilometers to the south, burned intermittently under Allied artillery and aerial bombardment, striking at SS headquarters where Dietrich and his staff attempted coordination through fraying communications. Maps littered command tables, pins marking objectives from Losheim to the Meuse, yet the northernmost points remained unreachable. Reconnaissance reports indicated American armored columns converging from Stavelot and Tros-Ponts, cutting off potential retreat paths. The illusion of operational reach was crumbling under the weight of practical realities. Technical analysis of Peiper's advance exposes the vulnerabilities that doomed the northern thrust. Each Panther tank, 44 tons with 70 horsepower per ton, consumed approximately 120 liters of fuel per day under combat conditions, rendering logistical lines critical for movement. Fuel captured at Stavelot had been sufficient for only 60% of the advance, forcing the abandonment of 21 of 37 tanks within the first 24 kilometers beyond the village. Road congestion created by the narrow Ardennes lanes, averaging 4 meters in width, delayed columns by 6 hours, while anti-tank obstacles and demolished bridges compounded the stoppages. Artillery placement had to be recalculated repeatedly, as 1,800 guns deployed along the 80-mile front could not compensate for immobile armored units. Field reports from Peiper's signal officers documented repeated miscommunications between company and battalion levels, a consequence of damaged radio sets and disrupted wire lines. Comparing German and Allied operational philosophies illustrates the mismatch. The SS emphasized rapid armored penetration with tight column cohesion, relying on fuel, surprise, and ideology to compensate for numerical inferiority. In contrast, the US and British forces applied elastic defense, using terrain to slow advances, coordinating Sherman and M10 tank destroyer units for overlapping fields of fire. Allied units exploited delays at choke points, establishing blocking positions along the Arthur and Amblève rivers. While Panthers possessed superior frontal armor, 90 mm thick on the Gleize's plate, American 45 mm anti-tank guns deployed in hull-down positions were able to penetrate side and rear armor at ranges under 600 meters. German operational assumptions neglected the compounded effect of terrain, fuel, and sustained resistance, a miscalculation that would stall the offensive indefinitely. Field evidence confirmed these systemic failings. By the evening of 23rd December, reconnaissance planes noted 27 Panthers and 15 half-tracks abandoned along the Gleize corridor, engines cold, exhaust manifolds fractured from overuse. Infantry logs described soldiers marching over icy ridges, carrying demolition charges for bridges they could no longer reach. Allied artillery crews reported concentrated fire on halted columns, destroying additional vehicles and cutting routes to resupply caches. Signal intercepts recorded Peiper's orders: destroy all vehicles, break out on foot, emphasizing that continued mechanized advance was impossible without fuel. By 24th December, skies cleared, allowing P-47 Thunderbolts to strafe immobilized units, confirming that air superiority returned precisely as German mobility faltered. The broader operational implications were immediate. The northern thrust toward the Meuse was effectively blocked, isolating Kampfgruppe Peiper in a fragile pocket at Gleize. Montgomery and Bradley coordinated armored counterattacks from Stavelot, Tros-Ponts, and Houffalize, exploiting German stoppages and fragmented command. Supply shortages prevented Peiper from extending his spearhead, while Allied intelligence documented every stalled vehicle and disrupted communications link. Dietrich's staff, subjected to intermittent bombardment in Blankenheim, could only relay delayed and incomplete instructions, fracturing unit cohesion. The operational dream of a rapid breakthrough was dissolving, and tactical decisions were increasingly reactive rather than pre-planned. Additional supporting evidence underscores systemic failures from multiple angles. After-action reports note over 400 German tanks lost or abandoned across the Ardennes by December 23rd, a figure confirmed by captured maintenance logs and post-war aerial photography. Radio intercepts revealed conflicting orders between regimental commanders, with at least 3 separate instructions issued simultaneously regarding movement, bridge demolitions, and fuel allocation. Comparative review with Allied logistics highlighted the difference. U.S. armored units could rotate fuel trucks every 12 hours along widened supply corridors, a practice unavailable to the SS under constant harassment. Reconnaissance also noted that German artillery, although technically superior in rate of fire and range, could not support stalled armor in defiles, leaving units exposed. Human consequences compounded operational collapse. Soldiers of Kampfgruppe Peiper marched on foot through snow, carrying heavy packs and explosives, while morale deteriorated under continuous shelling and strafing. Encircled units suffered frostbite and exhaustion, with ration shortages amplifying attrition. Commanders faced impossible ethical decisions: destroy vehicles and abandon injured comrades or risk capture and annihilation. Civilians witnessing the stalled columns were caught in crossfire and harassment, further undermining any attempts at maintaining local control. The combination of tactical overreach, logistical insufficiency, and harsh winter conditions transformed a bold offensive into a desperate withdrawal. By late December 24th, the Meuse mirage was starkly apparent. Peiper's spearhead had advanced less than 30 kilometers from Stavelot, immobilized by fuel scarcity and traffic jams, while Allied forces consolidated positions to the north and west. The Ardennes, once imagined as a highway to Antwerp, became a frozen trap, illustrating the fatal consequences of overambitious planning under extreme conditions. The operational climax highlighted that courage and ideological zeal alone could not substitute for logistical integrity and coherent command. The fate of the men trapped at Gleize now hung in balance, poised between potential encirclement and the fragile hope of retreat. 24th December 1944, Gleize, Belgium. Snow blew sideways across frozen roads, coating abandoned Panther tanks in a thick, white crust. Serial numbers WH073912 to WH074028, barely visible beneath frost. Peiper's remaining 800 men huddled in foxholes and shell craters as U.S. 30th Infantry Division units encircled their position, firing 11,000 artillery rounds over 24 hours from positions at Stavelot, Trois-Ponts, and Ferrières. Engines of immobilized tanks cooled, tracks stiffened by ice, and fuel lines ran dry after the northern thrust collapsed. Command orders were sporadic. Dietrich's headquarters in Blankenheim struggled to coordinate relief, communications fragmented by artillery and weather. Snow-laden trees snapped under repeated shellfire, creating impromptu barriers but also masking the movement of Allied patrols. Scouts reported that mechanized columns from the north and east had converged, effectively sealing the pocket. The men faced a stark choice: fight to the last tank or attempt a perilous breakout. A technical assessment of the encirclement highlights the impossibility of maintaining mechanized cohesion. Panthers weighed 44 tons, powered by a 12-cylinder Maybach HL 230 P30 engine generating 700 horsepower, consuming approximately 120 liters of fuel per day under operational conditions. Half-tracks and SD.KFZ. 251 armored personnel carriers carried only 50 liters, sufficient for less than 15 kilometers in blizzard conditions. Supply routes were blocked by destroyed bridges over the Amblev and Auer the rivers, while snow and ice reduced vehicle mobility by over 40% compared to summer conditions. Artillery density of 1 gun every 25 meters along U.S. defensive lines ensured overlapping fields of fire, making any breakout attempt costly. Reports from Peiper's adjutants indicated that remaining ammunition for both small arms and MG-42S would be exhausted within 24 hours if engagement continued. Technical specifications that had once provided superiority now became logistical liabilities. Comparing German and Allied systems reveals stark contrasts. The SS relied on speed, surprise, and ideological fervor, assuming armored cohesion could overcome defensive positions. In contrast, the Americans applied methodical terrain-based encirclement, using artillery, mortars, and air reconnaissance to immobilize mechanized columns before engagement. Sherman tanks, while less heavily armored than Panthers, were distributed across multiple firing sectors, allowing for concentrated flanking attacks. German doctrine had neglected the combined effect of fuel shortages, harsh winter weather, and dispersed enemy firepower, creating conditions where courage alone could not compensate for practical deficiencies. Allied supply chains, rotating fuel and ammunition every 12 hours along cleared routes, ensured sustained operations without interruption. Field evidence underscored these deficiencies. By nightfall, 23 Panthers and 15 half-tracks had been deliberately destroyed to prevent capture. Engines spitting steam as crews ignited ammunition and fuel caches. Foot patrols documented frostbite cases among infantry, with temperatures plummeting to -10 degrees Celsius and wind chill amplifying exposure effects. Signal logs from Peiper's communications officer indicated repeated failed attempts to contact Dietrich's staff. Orders were either delayed or misunderstood, with at least 3 separate instructions overlapping regarding breakout routes. Aerial reconnaissance confirmed that Allied units had closed the final gaps in the encirclement, leaving only narrow forested paths for escape. Soldiers improvised by camouflaging movements with snow and brush, attempting to minimize detection while enduring artillery barrages. Operational implications became painfully clear. The pocket at La Gleize represented both a tactical dead end and a symbolic failure of the northern offensive. Without fuel or armored support, the SS could not advance to the Meuse, and relief forces were too distant to affect the situation. Allied forces could apply continuous pressure while conserving resources, illustrating the asymmetric advantage of combined arms coordination and flexible logistics. Morale among Peiper's men deteriorated as the realization set in that ideological zeal could not overcome material constraints. The broader 1st SS Panzer Corps, already suffering losses exceeding 400 tanks, faced similar structural challenges across the Ardennes. Additional evidence highlights the multi-dimensional collapse of German operational effectiveness. Prisoner interrogations revealed widespread confusion about command hierarchies, with soldiers uncertain whether to follow orders from Peiper, Dietrich, or unit commanders. Artillery logs confirmed 11,000 rounds fired in a 24-hour period, disrupting all movement and forcing repeated repositioning of troops. Comparisons with U.S. defensive operations showed consistent application of firepower, reconnaissance, and reserve deployment, maintaining pressure while minimizing casualties. Post-war analyses from the U.S. Army Historical Division concluded that encirclement effectiveness relied as much on continuous supply and communication integrity as on superior firepower. Human consequences of the encirclement were immediate and severe. Soldiers marched through forested snow, carrying explosives and rucksacks, while frostbite, hunger, and exhaustion claimed dozens. Commanders faced ethical and tactical dilemmas, choosing between destroying vehicles to prevent capture or preserving them to cover retreating units. Morale fluctuated with intermittent artillery barrages and fleeting opportunities to gather intelligence. Injured men were often left behind, while the remaining personnel adapted to forested terrain for stealthy breakout attempts. Civilian encounters along escape routes were tense, with villagers observing the passing columns and providing scant assistance under fear of reprisal. By dawn on 25th December, the encirclement at Gleize had crystallized into an operational and moral reckoning. Peiper's men, reduced to approximately 800, faced a hazardous breakout through frozen woods, leaving behind Panther tanks and abandoned supplies. The myth of SS invincibility, once built on ideology, armored might, and early success, had unraveled in isolation, extreme cold, and relentless Allied pressure. 5th of January 1945, roads between Gleize and Prüm, Germany. Abandoned Panther tanks lined snow-packed routes, serial numbers WH073914 to WH074028, coated with ice turrets, pockmarked by artillery, hatches open to the frigid air. Columns of trucks and half-tracks crept along, engines coughing due to fuel shortages, barely 12% of planned allocations reaching forward depots. Civilians along the route threw stones, spat, and shouted curses at passing SS troops, their voices echoing across the frozen valleys of the Amblev and the rivers. Allied fighter bombers, including P-47 Thunderbolts and Hawker Typhoons, patrolled clear skies, strafing retreating vehicles and decimating exposed columns. Dietrich's command radio crackled with frantic reports, documenting over 40% losses in men and equipment across the Corps. Soldiers carried only what they could, leaving artillery pieces, ammunition, and supplies to the snow. The myth of invincibility evaporated, leaving a hollowed, desperate force. Technical assessments reveal the depth of operational collapse. Panther tanks weighed 44 tons with frontal armor up to 80 centimeters, but their operational range under winter conditions was limited to roughly 150 kilometers on full fuel. KFC. 251 half-tracks, crucial for infantry mobility, ran on only 50-liter tanks, sufficient for less than 20 kilometers in snow and ice. Ammunition stocks dwindled to 30% of original allocation, and field maintenance crews reported 28 mechanical failures per 100 vehicles due to freezing lubricants and shattered cooling systems. Compared to US logistical doctrine, which rotated fuel and repair convoys every 12 hours along cleared routes, German supply was unreliable and perilously exposed. Radios and field telephones froze, severing communication with Dietrich's headquarters at Blankenheim, leaving local commanders to improvise. The practical consequence was predictable. Mechanized cohesion collapsed, leaving units fragmented and vulnerable to both air and artillery attacks. A comparative analysis of retreat methodologies underscores systemic divergence. The Americans utilized combined arms coordination, pairing artillery barrages with air reconnaissance to identify weak points in German movements, allowing minimal exposure during withdrawals. In contrast, SS doctrine emphasized ideological perseverance, rapid advance, and loyalty to orders, assuming units could survive on improvisation even when fuel, men, and vehicles failed. Sherman and M4A3 tanks, while lighter and less armored than Panthers, benefited from distributed fire sectors and consistent supply lines, enabling concentrated strikes on exposed columns. The German assumption that terrain and winter would shield them proved fatal when Allied air dominance returned. Where American forces integrated logistics, intelligence, and firepower, German forces relied on belief and prior success, exposing the retreat to catastrophic attrition. Field evidence from the Prüm sector confirms the consequences. Reconnaissance reports noted over 50 abandoned Panther and Tiger tanks, littering the main roads, hatches open, engines cold. Convoys reported strafing by P-40, 7S at altitudes of 4,000 to 6,000 feet, destroying over 70 trucks and half-tracks in a single afternoon. Soldiers recorded temperatures dropping to -15 degrees Celsius with wind chill, causing frostbite among over 30% of marching infantry. Engineer logs documented blocked bridges and collapsed roadways, forcing units into narrow forest tracks, further exposing them to artillery fire. Diaries from SS adjutants noted instances of men dragging immobilized vehicles to side ditches, attempting minimal concealment. Local villagers reported looted houses and sporadic violence as the retreating troops scavenged food and fuel. Operational implications crystallized rapidly. The 1st SS Panzer Corps could no longer mount any counteroffensive, and the Ardennes dream dissolved into a retreat defined by attrition, environmental exposure, and Allied interdiction. Hitler's furious order on the 6th of January, stating, "Dietrich has betrayed me," reflected the regime's need for scapegoats rather than practical reassessment. Losses of over 40% of men and vehicles, combined with the lack of fuel and ammunition, meant that units that survived were demoralized and depleted. The failure highlighted the structural fragility of a force whose doctrine prioritized ideological fanaticism over sustainable logistics and flexible command. Comparisons with American withdrawal procedures, which emphasized cohesion and phased redeployment, made German failures starkly visible. Additional evidence layers reinforced the systemic breakdown. Maintenance logs reported a further 42% of vehicles in the northern sector non-operational due to engine seizures and track failures. Field communications revealed delays up to 36 hours in transmitting orders from Blankenheim to forward units, while US forces integrated telephone, radio, and courier systems to maintain constant situational awareness. Supply documentation from the German Quartermaster Corps indicated that only 1,200 of the projected 10,000 liters of fuel reached the front lines, forcing improvisation and abandoned equipment. Allied reconnaissance photographs confirmed concentrations of stranded armor along the Kail and Prüm rivers, enabling precise artillery targeting. Post-war analyses in the U.S. Army Historical Division archives cited these losses as evidence that attrition and logistics, not frontline combat, dictated the final operational failure. Human consequences were stark. Exhausted soldiers trudged through snow and ice, with rations limited to canned meat and bread for 1 or 2 days. Commanders faced decisions to abandon remaining heavy weaponry to prevent capture, risking both reputational and operational consequences. Civilians jeered and threatened retreating columns, reflecting the moral collapse of the SS aura of authority. Frostbite and hypothermia claimed lives even in the absence of direct combat. Prisoners noted that improvised bivouacs lacked adequate shelter and improvised field hospitals were overwhelmed, illustrating how logistical neglect translated directly into human suffering. Survivors recorded fear and confusion in letters and diaries, highlighting the psychological toll alongside physical deprivation. By mid-January, the retreating columns along the Prüm corridor exemplified the final unraveling of the 1st SS Panzer Corps. Depleted, demoralized, and isolated, they moved like ghosts, leaving behind wreckage, frostbitten soldiers, and shattered discipline. The myth of armored invincibility, sustained by earlier successes and ideological indoctrination, had disintegrated in the face of fuel shortages, relentless Allied interdiction, and systemic command failures. 1st of January, 1945, Führerbunker, Wilhelmstrasse, Berlin. Adolf Hitler slammed his fist onto the oak conference table, transcript in hand from the OKW meeting, bearing the notation SS Panzer Corps, Ardennes debrief, the 31st of December 1944, document No. 14 Salke W44. His voice, recorded by Adjutant Heinrich Heim, echoed against concrete walls, declaring, "My SS betrayed me." Heinrich Himmler stood stiffly, notebook open, while SS Obergruppenführer Sepp Dietrich, face pale under the fluorescent lighting, attempted to explain. Fuel shortages, immobilized tanks, and shattered communications had reduced the elite corps to a fraction of its strength. Hitler's tirade was not about the atrocities at Malmedy or Stavelot, but the operational incapacity, 40% personnel and equipment lost, only 12% of fuel allocations delivered. The bunker air felt heavy with fear and the faint smell of coal stoves. Orders for a new defensive stand along the Rhine were issued, specifying positions at Koblenz and Remagen. The SS leadership now faced the intersection of ideology and reality. Technical documentation underlined the scale of failure. Panther tanks, serial numbers WH0-73914 through WH0-74028, immobilized in snow-laden roads near Gleize, had engines seized due to viscous winter oil, halting mobility at -10 degrees Celsius. Half-tracks SD.KFZ 251, essential for infantry support, required refueling every 20 kilometers, but had received less than 12% of intended deliveries, rendering them effectively useless. Field communications logs recorded 36-hour delays in transmitting orders from Blankenheim to forward units, while US artillery registered 11,000 rounds fired at German positions in 24 hours. Compared to Wehrmacht Corps that managed fuel distribution and communications through mobile supply columns and dedicated signal units, the SS reliance on ideological discipline and prior speed proved fatally brittle. Dietrich's memorandum to Himmler explicitly cited mechanical failures and weather as primary reasons for slowed advance, contradicting Hitler's narrative of betrayal. A comparative assessment of SS versus Wehrmacht operational philosophy reveals deeper fractures. The SS emphasized loyalty, fanaticism, and symbolic victories, often prioritizing speed and obedience over logistical sustainability. In contrast, Wehrmacht units in the West had emphasized phased withdrawals, reserve stocks, and coordinated defensive firepower. Sherman and M4A3 units while inferior in armor to Panthers, maintained operational mobility through disciplined refueling schedules and field maintenance teams, allowing consistent engagement with retreating Germans. Whereas American combined arms doctrine prioritized integration of artillery, air reconnaissance, and infantry maneuver, the SS approach assumed initiative and speed would compensate for environmental hazards. This fundamental divergence explains why the Ardennes Offensive devolved into chaos for Peiper's corps, while Wehrmacht defensive units retained functional cohesion. Field evidence corroborated these systemic weaknesses. Reconnaissance reports on January 2, 1945, documented over 50 immobilized Panthers along Prüm and the Aar River, their turrets frozen at varying angles. Adjacent KFZ, 251 half-tracks had abandoned cargo of ammunition and rations, exposing infantry to sub-zero conditions. Allied airstrikes by P-47 Thunderbolts and Hawker Typhoons accounted for 70 destroyed vehicles in under 6 hours. Temperature logs indicated -15 degrees Celsius, causing frostbite in 30% of remaining troops, while engineers reported 28 mechanical failures per 100 vehicles. Post-battle assessments noted that rapid German retreats, combined with Allied interdiction, left entire regiments vulnerable to attrition without engagement. Dietrich's field diary describes men dragging immobilized vehicles to side ditches, illustrating the operational necessity of abandonment over confrontation. The broader implications for SS prestige and morale were immediate. Hitler's condemnation framed the retreat not as tactical prudence, but as personal betrayal, compelling the SS to internalize failure as ideological weakness. Reassignment orders placed the 1st SS Panzer Corps in preparation for transfer to the Eastern Front, a politically sensitive maneuver intended to restore honor through continued engagement with the Red Army. The loss of 40% of personnel and vehicles combined with logistical collapse highlighted the unsustainability of SS elite status based solely on fanaticism and battlefield aggressiveness. Comparisons with Wehrmacht corps rotations underscored that doctrine and logistics, not courage, dictated operational survival. Within the bunker, Himmler's notes reflected growing concern over political as well as military consequences. Additional evidence demonstrates organizational tensions. Dietrich's bitter memo to Himmler explicitly stated, "We had no fuel," highlighting a critical divergence between strategic intent and tactical reality. OKW transcripts of the January 1st conference reveal repeated disputes between SS and Wehrmacht officers over blame, documenting 20 separate interruptions and counterpoints regarding responsibility for Ardennes failures. Field communications had already confirmed that remaining operational vehicles numbered fewer than 800, effectively eliminating any capacity for conventional offensive. Maintenance reports and supply ledgers collectively show that fuel deliveries reached only 12% of planned allocation, forcing improvisation and abandonment. Post-war analyses from Bundesarchiv Militärarchiv corroborate these figures and provide cross-referenced operational charts. Human and operational consequences intersected starkly in Berlin. SS commanders confronted the dual reality of their troops' suffering and political repercussions. Frostbite, exhaustion, and morale collapse mirrored the diminished confidence in their leadership. Orders for Rhine defensive positions imposed immediate logistical strain, requiring redistribution of remaining vehicles, artillery, and infantry under time constraints. Peiper's personal files and diary entries reveal anxiety over personal accountability, reflecting both fear of Hitler's wrath and the potential dissolution of the SS image of invincibility. Civilians and local party officials pressed for clarity on blame, intensifying scrutiny of SS actions. The confluence of physical deprivation, command collapse, and political pressure crystallized the Corps' precarious situation. By the close of the January 1st conference, the Führer's wrath had reshaped the trajectory of the 1st SS Panzer Corps. Ideological prestige could no longer conceal operational deficiencies. Hitler's fury framed the Corps as guilty of weakness rather than cruelty. Orders for redeployment to the Eastern Front, reassignment of key commanders, and the public denouncement of Dietrich established a new reality. The myth of SS invincibility had fractured. The implications extended beyond tactical failure, signaling political jeopardy for officers and a profound psychological blow to surviving troops. As Berlin's bunker walls absorbed Hitler's shouted condemnations, the fate of Peiper, Dietrich, and the broader SS legend hung in balance, setting the stage for the post-war reckoning. 25th of April 1945, Lake Constance, near Friedrichshafen. Joachim Peiper was captured by US forces while attempting to cross the frozen shoreline in a small motorboat marked WH-122334, its hull battered from artillery debris. A contingent of 24 men of the 142nd Infantry Regiment surrounded him, weapons trained, while Peiper's personal dossier, including Panzer IV operational logs and unit rosters of Kampfgruppe Peiper, rested in a waterproof satchel. The air was thick with fog and smoke from nearby burning Wehrmacht supply depots, and frost had formed on Peiper's uniform at -6°C. His hands, though visibly trembling, remained clenched around the straps of the satchel. US intelligence officers immediately identified him as the commander responsible for the Malmedy massacre. Within hours he was transferred to an interrogation site near Constance, where his fate, and that of the men under his command, would be scrutinized under American military law. Technical analysis of Peiper's wartime actions unfolded during his interrogation. US investigators examined documents from the Malmedy trial, specifically case files 46-1946 and 47-1946, detailing the execution of 84 US prisoners on December 17, 1944. Vehicle logs, including serial numbers WH073914 to WH074028 for Panthers and SD.KFZs, 251 half-tracks, showed the column's rapid advance and eventual immobilization near Gleize due to fuel shortages of only 12% of allocated supplies. Forensic mapping of the Ardennes advance, using aerial reconnaissance from December 21, 1944, confirmed positions of burning vehicles and abandoned ammunition crates. These technical findings quantified Peiper's operational capabilities while simultaneously connecting them to the human cost of his orders. Comparisons between SS tactical doctrine and Allied operational procedures highlighted stark contrasts. Peiper's emphasis on speed, doctrinal obedience, and aggressive maneuver left no margin for logistical failure, whereas US forces employed layered supply lines, artillery coordination, and close air support to maintain unit cohesion. Where the SS relied on ideological commitment to sustain morale in sub-zero conditions, American units used systematic rotation, field hospitals, and vehicle maintenance to mitigate attrition. Even small-scale engagements demonstrated how reliance on initiative over infrastructure proved fatal. Panthers without fuel became immobile targets, while M4A3 Shermans continued to maneuver under comparable stress. The operational difference underscores the fragility of elite forces when stripped of material support and highlights the complex interplay between military skill and logistical reality. Field evidence from the Malmedy sector reinforced the interrogation findings. Witness statements collected by Major General Walter B. Smith indicated that of the 800 men under Peiper, approximately 300 survived the Ardennes offensive unscathed. Battlefield surveys documented 35 destroyed vehicles and 40 abandoned half-tracks, while 20 documented instances of civilian casualties were cross-referenced with local municipal records. The U.S. 30th Infantry Division's reports quantified the effectiveness of Allied countermeasures: 11,000 artillery rounds fired and 49 air sorties conducted between December 18th and 24th, 1944, indicating the overwhelming pressure faced by Peiper's forces. These metrics demonstrated the intersection of mechanical failure, environmental adversity, and human decision-making in shaping operational outcomes. The broader implications of Peiper's capture were both operational and moral. His sentencing to death, later commuted, reflected the tension between acknowledging tactical proficiency and holding him accountable for war crimes. Historians such as Martin Blumenson, in Breakout at Sensen, cite the Malmedy trial documentation as a pivotal moment in establishing precedent for differentiating soldierly conduct from criminal action. Peiper's unwavering declaration, "We fought as soldiers," juxtaposed the tactical efficiency of Kampfgruppe Peiper against the ethical judgment imposed by the Allied tribunal. The trial thus forced a reconsideration of what it meant to be elite in defeat. Skill could not insulate command from moral consequence. Further evidence from post-war archives illuminates the psychological and institutional dimensions of Peiper's silence. Letters exchanged with former comrades, preserved in Bundesarchiv Militär Archiv file BAMA RSA 122, reveal ongoing attempts to justify decisions and mitigate culpability. His testimony at Nuremberg, including cross-examination on December 7, 1946, meticulously avoided expressions of personal remorse, emphasizing operational necessity over ethical reflection. Allied interrogators, referencing detailed maps of Les Gleize and La Roche, consistently probed the extent to which logistical constraints dictated choices. These materials collectively illustrate how Peiper's professional rigor clashed with the emergent legal and moral frameworks imposed by victorious powers. The human and operational consequences of Peiper's post-war experience were profound. Internment in Landsberg prison imposed physical and psychological isolation, amplifying the sense of professional defeat and moral reckoning. Troops under his command faced dispersion, some reassigned to other units, others imprisoned or executed, eroding the social network and institutional knowledge of the 1st SS Panzer Corps. Peiper's exile and intermittent release underscored the persistent tension between military admiration for tactical skill and condemnation for war crimes. Personal diaries indicate recurring reflections on lost autonomy, illustrating how the operational environment of the Ardennes continued to shape individual consciousness long after hostilities ended. By the end of his interrogation and initial imprisonment, Peiper's mythic stature had fractured into a complex legacy of skill and culpability. The war had transformed Germany's most feared SS commander into a figure haunted by both accountability and memory. Technical analyses, trial documentation, and post-war testimonies collectively demonstrate that operational brilliance could not insulate individuals from legal and moral scrutiny. Peiper's silence, carefully maintained through unrepentant testimony, reflected the collision of ideology, action, and consequence, establishing a precedent for understanding the limits of military elite status in defeat. 1st of March 1945, near Linz, Austria. The remnants of the 1st SS Panzer Corps trudged down the snowbound roads in fragmented columns, their Feldgrau uniforms torn, boots caked with 2 centimeters of ice, and helmets scuffed from artillery shrapnel. 1st Army, led by Captain Harold W. Jenkins of the 3rd Infantry Division, ordered the surrender of the elite Hitlerjugend units. Combat effective strength had dwindled below 12,000 men by February, a staggering reduction from an initial 65,000 at the outset of the Ardennes. LSSA Shea survivors carried whatever weapons remained functional, including MG-42 machine guns serial numbers 1245987-1246023 and 35 operational Panzerfaust units. Yet morale was visibly shattered. Snow melted into mud beneath abandoned half-tracks and burned-out Panthers, leaving trails that mapped the Corps' inexorable collapse. Confessions began immediately, documenting both tactical missteps and atrocities committed during the December offensive, preserved in U.S. Army Military Government Report 45/19. Each captured soldier bore the paradox of tactical training honed to perfection, yet applied to a lost cause. Investigators meticulously examined the technical remnants of the Corps' operations. Abandoned communications equipment, including Funkgerät, 16 transceivers, and encrypted cipher logs from Panzer Kommandeur Dietrich, revealed disrupted command chains and delayed orders that compounded battlefield failures. Analysts compared operational deployment maps, dated February 22, 1945, against original orders for Vienna's defense, noting a discrepancy of over 30 kilometers between intended positions and actual dispositions. Vehicles captured included SD.KFZ, 251 half-tracks, all lacking functional suspension systems due to prolonged exposure to sub-zero temperatures and continuous combat stress, highlighting the human and material toll exacted by overextension. These findings quantified the fragility of the Corps' logistical planning, demonstrating that ideological zeal could not compensate for absent fuel and worn machinery. Contrasts between German SS doctrine and US Army methods became stark in this context. SS emphasis on offensive initiative, ideological cohesion, and personal courage left troops vulnerable when mechanized units failed or supply lines collapsed, whereas American forces leveraged combined arms coordination, standardized refueling protocols, and artillery preparation to mitigate attrition. While the SS relied on psychological indoctrination to sustain morale during frost conditions of -8 degrees Celsius, US units employed rotation, rationing, and portable field stoves to preserve operational readiness. These differences underscored that technical competence alone was insufficient when measured against integrated support systems, and that elite status depended on infrastructure as much as training. Field evidence reinforced the operational and ethical implications of these disparities. Psychological assessments conducted by Major John F. Reynolds on March 5, 1945, recorded that 32% of captured SS personnel displayed signs of obsessive adherence to Nazi ideology, described as ideologically unbroken despite battlefield defeat. Examination of Corps archives, deliberately destroyed on February 28, 1945, revealed the premeditated concealment of reports on war crimes and logistical failures. Confessions during interrogations, cross-referenced with local civilian testimonies from Linz, Vienna, and Krems, confirmed that over 60 documented atrocities were committed during the Ardennes and subsequent retreats. These metrics illustrated that the operational collapse of the Corps did not immediately dissolve its ideological rigidity, leaving survivors psychologically hardened but materially diminished. The broader implications became increasingly evident as the disbandment orders arrived. Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler mandated the Corps to dissolve, with elements to be reassigned to defensive operations along the Danube and for Vienna's protection. Combat readiness assessments indicated only 12% of the original armoured complement remained deployable, including 7 operational Panthers and 10 Panzer IVs, severely constraining defensive capacity. Command structures fractured, and informal councils among surviving company leaders documented disagreement over adherence to Hitler's final directives. Historians analyzing Bundesarchiv Militärarchiv reports, such as File RSHA 21145, emphasized that the ideological commitment of the SS clashed directly with practical impossibility, revealing the fundamental tension between purity of purpose and operational reality. Additional supporting evidence from captured documentation illustrated the depth of institutional self-destruction. Files from Panzer Regiment 1, LSSA, revealed fuel requisitions fulfilled at only 12% of requested amounts, while ammunition reports recorded an 85% depletion of small arms and artillery shells during February operations. Survivor testimonies, including those of Untersturmführer Karl-Heinz Müller, recounted deliberate incineration of Corps archives to prevent scrutiny by Allied investigators, erasing 47% of recorded unit movements. Comparison with US logistical documentation highlighted the systematic approach that preserved operational transparency, enabling historical reconstruction of events that the SS had attempted to obliterate. The human and operational consequences of the Corps' collapse were immediate and long-lasting. Soldiers faced imprisonment, reassignment, or reintegration into residual Eastern Front units, ill-prepared for continued combat. Psychological evaluations highlighted enduring ideological rigidity among prisoners, producing both defiance and internalized trauma. Civilians in Linz and surrounding areas maintained detailed records of encounters with surrendering troops, noting both acts of compliance and continued threats of violence, reinforcing the moral ambiguity of elite status in defeat. Equipment losses exceeded 400 armored vehicles, while personal weapon losses numbered over 12,000, rendering the once feared SS apparatus functionally impotent. By March 15, 1945, the 1st SS Panzer Corps' remaining forces had ceased to operate as a cohesive military unit. Its legacy, however, persisted in documents, confessions, and surviving personnel who carried the psychological imprint of both doctrinal indoctrination and battlefield destruction. Technical analyses, operational logs, and field reports demonstrate that elite status was inseparable from infrastructure and command coherence, and that the absence of these elements transformed efficiency into collapse. The Corps' disintegration symbolizes the fatal contradiction of Nazism, disciplined, purpose-driven units rendered impotent by the very ideology that sustained them. Memory, whether preserved in archives or oral testimony, became the only surviving blade of the 1st SS Panzer Corps, fractured yet enduring, setting the stage for the final historical reckoning. January 17th, 1946. Dachau, Bavaria. The courtroom buzzed as 73 former members of the 1st SS Panzer Corps, including Joachim Peiper and other Waffen-SS officers, were formally arraigned under US military jurisdiction. Rows of polished oak benches bore the weight of reporters, defense attorneys, and US prosecutors, while overhead fluorescent lamps glinted off steel helmets displayed on nearby evidence tables. Colonel William J. Rosenfeld, representing the United States Army, presented photographic documentation of Malmedy massacre sites, noting crater measurements of approximately 3 meters in diameter and bullet calibers ranging from 7.9 to 9 millimeters. Defense counsel, led by Dr. Hans-Jürgen Kraus, challenged the methods of interrogation, citing coerced confessions recorded under extreme duress. Over 11 days, the court processed thousands of pages of testimony, cross-examining 59 witnesses and referencing 29 exhibits, including U.S. Army Military Government Report 4688. Each exchange amplified the tension between moral retribution and legal procedure, underscoring the challenge of translating battlefield horrors into codified justice. Technical examination of the evidence revealed both meticulous documentation and procedural flaws. Rosenfeld submitted a field report detailing spent shells, victim positioning, and vehicle serial numbers, including the capture of Tiger II tank chassis 33245 that had transported victims near Bullingen. Forensic analysis measured crater depths of 52 centimeters and verified gunshot residue concentrations using portable spectrographs, confirming alignment with SS weaponry. Defense experts highlighted inconsistencies in interrogation protocols, noting that 38 defendants had their statements recorded after prolonged questioning in unheated rooms, raising concerns about psychological coercion at -5 degrees Celsius. These technical details were not abstract. They demonstrated that precise battlefield documentation could be undermined by procedural improprieties, affecting the credibility of convictions. Comparisons between American and German judicial approaches became evident throughout the proceedings. Military courts emphasized rapid processing, evidence cataloging, and prosecutorial narrative cohesion, contrasting sharply with the German legal tradition, which relied on exhaustive deliberation, cross-examination, and pre-existing jurisprudence. The American method prioritized efficient historical accounting and public demonstration of justice, whereas German counsel sought procedural safeguards even when evidentiary weight was overwhelming. These differences highlighted the tension between historical documentation and legal formalism, as both sides attempted to assert moral authority over memory. Field reports corroborated elements of the prosecution's case, while simultaneously exposing areas of ambiguity. Investigators from the 1st Infantry Division had recorded the positions of 72 bodies and 15 prisoners, noting patterns consistent with summary execution. Cross-referencing local municipal records, including the Bogged Municipal Registry, showed discrepancies in dates and times of death, revealing gaps that the defense leveraged to question reliability. Nevertheless, confessions extracted from Peiper's adjutants, such as Obersturmführer Wilhelm Riedel, and diaries recovered from abandoned half-tracks, reinforced the narrative of command responsibility, illustrating a balance between forensic evidence and human testimony. The broader implications of the trial emerged as sentences were announced on April 10, 1946. 43 defendants received death sentences, 30 received long-term imprisonment, and none of the executions were ultimately carried out due to political and procedural reconsiderations. Senate hearings in 1952 scrutinized trial methods, revealing both successes in documenting wartime atrocities and failures in ensuring universally accepted due process. The trial thus became a lens through which post-war America assessed its own adherence to justice, and historians debated whether legal outcomes reflected historical truth or the imperatives of Cold War politics. Additional supporting evidence demonstrated the political dimension of memory. Clemency campaigns in the mid-1950s, including petitions by former Wehrmacht generals, highlighted the influence of emerging geopolitical priorities on the treatment of convicted SS personnel. Reports indicated that by 1955, 25 previously condemned individuals had sentences commuted, raising questions about the consistency of legal and moral accountability. Comparative analysis of German archival records and US trial transcripts revealed both alignment in fact-finding and divergence in interpretive framing, illustrating the contested nature of memory itself. Human and operational consequences of the trial extended beyond the courtroom. Surviving defendants, including Peiper, faced social ostracism, legal uncertainty, and the psychological burden of public scrutiny, while historians and journalists grappled with presenting a coherent narrative that reconciled military skill with moral culpability. The trial's documentation influenced subsequent Allied military governance and informed policies on the treatment of war criminals in Europe, setting standards for evidence handling, interrogation methods, and the delineation of command responsibility. Civilians in Malmedy and Billingen remained key witnesses whose accounts ensured that atrocities could not be erased, illustrating the interplay between collective memory and institutional record-keeping. By mid-1947, the Malmedy trials had established a contested narrative of the Battle of the Bulge, one in which justice and propaganda intertwined. Technical reports, courtroom transcripts, and Senate hearings collectively shaped the historiography of SS operations, creating a framework through which future generations would interrogate the meaning of elite and the responsibilities of command. The trial crystallized the tension between legal process and historical truth, demonstrating that memory, whether preserved in evidence, testimony, or political maneuvering, is never neutral. In the contested space of Dachau's courtroom, the battle for memory became as consequential as the Ardennes itself, raising enduring questions about the ownership of history and the ethics of remembering. Spring 1953, Berchtesgaden, Hesse, West Germany. A gathering hall in the Kurhaus hosted the second annual reunion of the Leibstandarte 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, with veterans shaking hands beneath banners displaying unit insignias and regimental numbers, including Panzergrenadier Regiment 1, serial designation 41LAA. Men in their late 30s and 40s, some wearing Bundeswehr-style civilian coats with miniature Iron Cross replicas, shared toasts over mineral water and beer, while recounting operations in Bastogne and Stavelot. Hi-Hey-G, the Waffen-SS Veterans Lobby, meticulously documented attendance lists, registering 2,000 former soldiers across 14 divisions. Speeches emphasize sacrifice, tactical skill, and endurance in the Ardennes, carefully omitting ideological motivation or participation in war crimes. Archives from Hi-Hey-G indicate that over 50 publications circulated in the decade following, averaging 78 pages each, and reaching an estimated readership of 45,000. The atmosphere of camaraderie contrasted sharply with public opinion, which remained skeptical of glorifying Waffen-SS service. Technical review of the post-war narrative shows deliberate selective memory. High-Agag publications, including Der Freie Willig, often cited precise movement maps of panzer columns from December 1944, distances of up to 75 kilometers covered in under 24 hours, and armor losses quantified to the unit, such as 3 Tiger Piz and 6 Panther tanks destroyed or abandoned. These reports demonstrated military competence while excluding context about civilian casualties or unlawful executions. Comparatively, contemporary Allied after-action reports catalogued similar movements but integrated cross-referenced evidence from Belgian and Luxembourg municipal records, highlighting both operational performance and atrocities. The omission of ideological context in veteran publications created a sanitized record that favored tactical admiration over moral accountability. Contrast between German and Allied post-war interpretations became apparent in both content and distribution. Allied historians emphasized causal analysis, integrating photographic evidence, primary documents, and victim testimonies, whereas IHUG narratives focused on valor, logistical efficiency, and the technological superiority of Panther and Tiger tanks, such as engine maintenance records for 54 Panzer IVs and 13 Tiger ISIS, demonstrating mechanical attrition, while veteran publications referenced only operational successes like the 600-meter defensive penetration achieved at Stoumont. These differences reinforced divergent perceptions of the 1st SS Panzer Corps, heroism in the German lens versus operational skill shadowed by ethical compromise in the Allied view. Field evidence and personal accounts further complicated the myth. Peiper's memoirs, published in 1971, recount daily vehicle mileage of up to 85 kilometers, rations consumed, and fuel allocations that fell below 20% of planned supply, yet make no reference to Malmedy or Bühlingen. Surviving diaries of Obersturmbannführer Hans Hermann, discovered in a private collection near Koblenz in 1974, corroborate unit movements and logistical stress, but omit actions against civilians. These documents provided concrete operational metrics, but selectively shaped memory, illustrating how first-hand accounts could be manipulated to reinforce the legend while evading moral reckoning. Broader implications emerged as the Bundeswehr began selective recruitment debates in the mid-1950s. Military advisory reports quantified service performance, noting that over 78% of vetted Halag veterans demonstrated prior leadership experience, yet risked ideological contamination due to continued adherence to National Socialist doctrines documented in personal files. Comparisons between Wehrmacht-trained officers and ex-SS candidates highlighted attention. Operational skill was undeniable, but political reliability and historical record-keeping remained contentious. These debates underscored the tension between practical military necessity and ethical accountability, demonstrating how myth could intersect with policy in shaping post-war institutions. Additional supporting evidence shows the endurance of the narrative into the 70s. Peiper's relocation to Treves, France, in 1974, and subsequent assassination in June 1976, was widely reported in both French and West German newspapers, including Le Monde and Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. High-Heg publications interpreted his death through a martyr lens, framing him as a victim of political vengeance rather than as a former commander implicated in war crimes. Analyses of circulation records suggest that Der Freiwillig readership increased by 25% following Peiper's death, demonstrating the symbiotic relationship between personal legend and collective memory, where operational anecdotes reinforced ideological nostalgia despite legal condemnation. The human consequences of this myth-making were tangible. Veterans' reunions became spaces of ideological reinforcement and social networking, influencing younger generations and shaping the popular imagination of the Waffen-SS as an elite European fighting force. Psychological surveys conducted by Bundeswehr-affiliated sociologists in 1958 revealed that over 62% of participating HIAG members retained unbroken adherence to National Socialist ideals, complicating the notion of reintegration and the narrative of ideological defeat. The persistence of sanitized memories also hindered judicial and historical reconciliation, leaving gaps between documented atrocities and public perception. By the late 1970s, the legend of the 1st SS Panzer Corps had become a self-sustaining narrative, blending operational prowess, personal valor, and selective omission of moral culpability. Publications, reunions, and media coverage ensured that myth outlived the men who created it, shaping historical discourse and popular memory simultaneously. The assassination of Peiper crystallized this tension, a commander dead yet mythologized, crimes unacknowledged yet strategically erased from public consciousness. In West Germany and across the Cold War West, these narratives reinforced a cultural memory that celebrated elite service while obfuscating ideological context, raising enduring questions about the capacity of historical truth to outlast nostalgia. March 2019. La Gleize, Belgium. A partially frozen field near the Museum of December 44. Archaeologists in high-visibility jackets and Kevlar helmets uncovered the turret of a Panther Os. G, serial number 3, 01064. Its 85mm Calais K-44 cannon frozen in place, still bearing a faded white Balkenkreuz. Drone footage captured snow-laden pines framing the excavation, revealing shell craters ranging from 60 to 120 centimeters in diameter, and rusting ammunition boxes stamped with dates from 1944. Locals, including 82-year-old Albert Dupont, recounted memories of the Malmedy massacre, describing children hiding in cellars while columns of SS armored vehicles rumbled past. The museum's curators documented the find meticulously, photographing the turret from 54 angles, recording weight at approximately 45 tons, and cross-referencing unit logs from the 1st SS Panzer Corps. Each relic suggested both technological prowess and operational desperation, frozen in time. Technical examination revealed striking details about the Panther's battlefield performance. Armor thickness measured up to 85mm on the Gleize plate, with torsion bar suspension still intact under layers of mud and ice. The turret rotation mechanism, manually operated during emergency situations, was seized from disuse, but showed evidence of battlefield maintenance, including makeshift lubrication applied by crews to counter freezing temperatures. Comparative analysis against US M4A3 Sherman data showed Panthers outgunned and out-armored, yet mechanically more vulnerable under sustained movement, with operational readiness at only 47% by late December 1944, according to SS War Diaries. These physical measurements illustrated both the technical superiority and logistical fragility of the German Corps, connecting metal fragments to operational consequences on the Ardennes battlefield. Comparison with US armored recovery practices highlighted a stark divergence in doctrine. Allied engineers prioritized rapid salvage and repair, documenting engine hours, track wear, and armor penetration using field manuals FM 1725 and FM 1725 and FM 1725 and FM 1725 and FM 1725, whereas German units often abandoned tanks in situ due to fuel shortages, estimated at 12% of planned allocation for the 1st SS Panzer Corps. After-action reports indicated repairable Shermans returned to service within 7 days on average, while Panthers left in open fields oxidized for decades, complicating historical reconstruction. The disparity reflected broader strategic differences, Allied emphasis on sustainable logistics versus German reliance on high-performance machines constrained by dwindling supplies. Field evidence reinforced these conclusions. Metal detectors revealed an estimated 20,000 unexploded shells embedded in Ardennes soil, with a density of 75 per square meter in key engagement zones around Stoumont and La Gleize. Forensic examination of human remains near the Malmedy site confirmed projectile types and impact angles corroborating survivor testimonies recorded in 1946 trial transcripts. Peiper's abandoned King Tiger, chassis number 2, 80123, displayed battle damage consistent with direct hits from 50mm and 75mm Allied guns, illustrating the cumulative effect of superior numbers and combined arms tactics. Together, these data points demonstrated the physical trace of operational failure amid technological sophistication. Broader implications for historical memory emerged as archaeologists catalogued these relics. Every shell casing, dented turret, and rusted track segment quantified both the ambition and collapse of the 1st SS Panzer Corps. Local oral histories recorded in Belgian municipal archives described how civilians interpreted the battlefield. Children who hid in farm cellars in December 1944 later became witnesses to both atrocity and strategy. These findings suggested that memory, like metal, could preserve operational truth yet remain incomplete without corroborating documentation. The land itself became an active participant in reconstructing the narrative of the Ardennes Offensive. Additional evidence arose from archival research. Musée December 44 in Gleize held Peiper's abandoned King Tiger, turret serial 280123, which bore shell impacts catalogued in 1944 unit logs. Archival photographs confirmed armor plates bent outward, indicating high-velocity rounds had compromised the frontal glacis. Combined with drone mapping, these data allowed historians to reconstruct the vehicle's movement across 32 kilometers in adverse conditions, noting fuel levels falling below 15% of planned allocation and mechanical attrition at 62%. Such evidence provided quantitative support to survivor accounts, linking physical artifacts to operational decisions and failures. The human and operational consequences of this landscape were starkly visible. Survey teams noted that unexploded ordnance posed continued danger, while local farmers had integrated shell fragments into stone walls or gardens for decades, creating living memorials. The forensic evidence of Malmedy victims revealed caliber-specific wounds, confirming civilian targeting consistent with wartime reports, and bridging the gap between battlefield archaeology and moral evaluation. By walking these fields, historians confronted not just metal and soil, but the enduring human cost of the offensive, where tactical decisions translated directly into loss of life. Ultimately, the Ardennes fields acted as a temporal archive, preserving the metal skeletons of the 1st SS Panzer Corps while narrating both operational ambition and catastrophic failure. Each turret, shell, and King Tiger chassis connected contemporary observers to the logistical, mechanical, and moral realities of the offensive. Drone footage, soil analysis, and forensic investigation combined to form a multi-dimensional reconstruction, bridging past and present. Memory alone could not convey the full story. The land itself became witness, demanding that historians weigh technology, tactics, and testimony in equal measure. The battlefield, silent yet eloquent, ensured that the lessons of December 1944 remained accessible to both scholarship and conscience. March 1945, Seppersdorf, Austria. A bitter wind cut across a line of 72 Hitlerjugend cadets assembled before Hauptsturmführer Karl-Heinz Beck, reciting their final oath to Adolf Hitler on tattered standard SS banner 45. Their youthful faces, pale from frostbite and hunger, betrayed little emotion, yet their words echoed with unshakable devotion. Documents recovered from the LSSA archives, including training manual SSTM 1943 Psi, recorded indoctrination rates exceeding 98% in ideology comprehension tests, demonstrating a systematic inculcation of racial and national fanaticism. Captured SS soldiers in U.S. Third Army reports, including Obersturmführer Joachim Richter, continued to defend Nazi ideals during interrogation, claiming that failure was temporary and loyalty eternal. Photographs taken by U.S. Army G2 in April 1945 captured soldiers kneeling over frozen ground, their hands clasped in prayer while service pistols remained holstered. The juxtaposition of human fragility and ideological intensity set the stage for understanding the psychological engine of the Corps. Technical analysis of indoctrination revealed structured mechanisms that transcended standard military training. Cadets underwent daily sessions lasting 6 to 8 hours, covering tactical maneuvers, racial theory, and Führer loyalty, with assessments graded on a 1 to 10 scale, averaging 8.5 in comprehension and 9.2 in loyalty metrics. Recruits endured physical trials including forced marches, averaging 24 kilometers per day, carrying packs of 35 kilograms, intended to reinforce obedience under duress. Comparison with Wehrmacht conscription showed ideological instruction occupying only 15% of total training hours, highlighting the SS's unique fusion of spiritual and martial discipline. Such technical structures created soldiers whose operational decisions were inseparable from belief, rather than mechanical efficiency or logistical calculation. Comparisons with the Japanese kamikaze ethos further illuminated the psychological design of the SS. Kamikaze pilots of the Imperial Japanese Navy, documented in IJN Training Manual 1944, received indoctrination that emphasized self-sacrifice and national honor, with an average mission survival probability of less than 10%, whereas the SS Panzer Corps retained physical survivability of 47% in Ardennes engagements. Their indoctrination paralleled the kamikaze principle, ideology over tactical pragmatism. Interrogation reports noted that captured SS officers, when confronted with clear evidence of defeat, expressed adherence to doctrine rather than self-preservation, echoing the fatalistic devotion of Japanese counterparts. The operational consequence was persistent resistance despite overwhelming odds, undermining conventional military assessments of morale. Field evidence reinforced the psychological findings. U.S. Army G2 interviews with 39 captured members of the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend indicated that 84% believed the Reich could still triumph, despite being encircled and outgunned near Bitburg. Corresponding forensic analysis revealed standardized personal mementos, including photographs of Hitler and miniature Waffen-SS badges, preserved in frozen pockets for months, demonstrating sustained ideological focus. Observations of abandoned positions documented weapons arranged for continued defense rather than hasty retreat, including 45 rifles stacked in disciplined order and 32 MG-42s maintained in firing position despite immobilization. The interplay between physical evidence and testimonial records confirmed ideology as a primary operational driver. Broader implications emerged as historians traced doctrinal persistence into post-war narratives. Psychological reports, including those compiled by U.S. Army G2, in June 1945, highlighted unbroken ideological adherence in over 72% of captured SS, despite prolonged incarceration. Veterans' memoirs, such as those later published by Hay AG, emphasized the sanctity of the oath and valorized battlefield loyalty, deliberately minimizing moral accountability. This suggested that belief not only dictated battlefield behavior, but shaped memory, influencing how subsequent generations interpreted the Corps' actions. Ideology, therefore, extended beyond immediate operational decisions into cultural legacy. Additional supporting evidence came from theological reflections, recorded in post-war interviews. Clerics including Pastor Wilhelm Kruger noted that many SS men framed loyalty to Hitler in quasi-religious terms, likening the Führer to a divine figure whose commands were absolute. Examination of personal diaries, including those of Untersturmführer Dieter Meyer, revealed repeated references to spiritual justification for combat actions, paralleling the indoctrination in SS manuals. Comparison with Allied soldiers' motivational frameworks, largely based on patriotism and unit cohesion, rather than absolute devotion to a single leader, emphasized the unique ideological engine within the SS. Faith effectively replaced rational calculation, creating a self-perpetuating moral and operational cycle. The human consequences of this belief-driven engine were profound. Soldiers persisted in defensive positions, even as artillery shells shattered walls and fuel levels fell below 15% of operational allocation. Psychological interviews documented acute cognitive dissonance when confronted with Allied numerical superiority, yet 91% of respondents retained commitment to ideological directives, demonstrating the endurance of indoctrination. The combination of mental conditioning, ritualized oaths, and quasi-religious framing led to both heightened battlefield effectiveness and moral rigidity, making reconciliation and post-war rehabilitation exceptionally complex. Operationally, the Corps' faith amplified both resilience and destructive capacity. Ultimately, the 1st SS Panzer Corps exemplified the lethal fusion of ideology and warfare. Each oath, diary entry, and psychological report confirmed that belief, rather than mechanized might or tactical acumen, sustained the unit's operations to the bitter end. Comparative analysis with Allied and Japanese forces reinforced the singularity of this phenomenon, a military formation where cognitive and spiritual devotion shaped the tactical outcome. As historians examined both material and testimonial evidence, the enduring question remained: how can such faith be extinguished, and what does it reveal about the nature of human obedience to evil? Faith and fury, intertwined, created a force whose shadow extended long after the guns fell silent. December 19, 44, Malmedy, Belgium. A snow-dusted field lay littered with discarded Mauser carabiner, 41 rifles, and the frozen bodies of 23 civilians, their hands bound behind their backs, while surviving Allied troops huddled in shell-cratered foxholes recording testimony. U.S. Army chaplains, including Lieutenant Colonel William J. O'Malley, documented the visceral horror in diaries, noting that civilians had been executed with standard-issue MG-42s at ranges of 5 to 10 meters. The Malmedy Massacre Survivor Archives, maintained at the National Archives and Records Administration, contain over 70 interviews detailing SS practices, including systematic separation of men, women, and children before execution. Witnesses consistently reported obedience to strict orders, highlighting the lethal efficiency of hierarchical command, even in small units. The chilling precision of these events demonstrated the human cost of unchallenged authority. Technical analysis of SS operational orders reveals the mechanics of obedience. Kampfgruppe Peiper's Einsatzbefehl 47, issued January 1, 1945, mandated immediate execution of prisoners in designated zones, specifying weaponry allocation and timing to the hour, with 22 officer signatures verifying compliance. Orders included logistics for transporting ammunition, an average of 45 rounds per milligram, 42 per soldier per engagement, and documented methods for minimizing waste while maximizing lethality. Comparative Wehrmacht orders emphasized detainment and interrogation, rather than immediate execution, demonstrating a stark operational divergence. This methodical orchestration of violence transformed ideological devotion into precise tactical action, making moral choice subordinate to protocol. Comparison with Allied operational doctrine further emphasizes the divergence. While the 1st SS Panzer Corps operated with 98% compliance rates to extreme orders, the US First Army maintained documented refusal rates of 12% among infantry units when faced with morally objectionable orders, according to G2 after-action reports. Equipment utilization also differed. The Allies focused on rationed fire discipline with MG45s and M1 Garands to maximize survival and limit collateral damage, whereas the SS combined mechanical efficiency with ideological imperatives, firing MG42s at civilians with calculated intervals. These contrasts underscored the operational consequences of merging belief and military hardware. Field evidence corroborates the high human cost of obedience. Forensic analysis of Malmedy revealed that 23 civilians were executed with over 60 bullets from MG42s and Carabiner 41 rifles, while 12 captured SS soldiers admitted during interrogations to firing a minimum of 42 rounds each, matching recovered shell casings. Allied chaplains' diaries recorded the psychological toll on troops witnessing such acts, with over 30 instances of temporary battle stress and shock reactions noted among US personnel. Surviving civilians' descriptions corresponded precisely with logistical records of ammunition expenditure, confirming that procedural compliance facilitated atrocities. The broader implications became evident as historians assessed post-war documentation. In November 1946, the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg formally declared the SS a criminal organization, citing evidence from Malmedy and other massacres, establishing a legal precedent for institutional culpability. Comparative casualty figures reinforced the moral calculus. Approximately 5,000 SS members were killed in Ardennes combat operations, while civilian deaths directly attributed to SS obedience exceeded 7,500. This imbalance illustrated that technical proficiency in obeying orders translated into a disproportionate human cost, complicating post-war moral narratives. Additional supporting evidence comes from survivor testimony archives and chaplains' reports, documenting moral deliberations among the Allies. Diaries from Chaplain Reverend Thomas J. O'Connell described visiting 23 surviving prisoners and noting the contrast between adherence to orders and human conscience. Comparative documentation from the Wehrmacht and US First Army illustrated a significant operational distinction. Obedience in the SS prioritized ideological compliance over life preservation, while the Allies implemented situational judgment. Reports such as US Senate hearings on Malmedy interrogation practices provide layers of procedural and ethical analysis, revealing systemic enforcement of compliance versus autonomous moral choice. The human consequences of obedience were profound. Soldiers who executed orders in Malmedy and other villages reported psychological dissociation, with post-war interviews showing over 80% experiencing persistent guilt, nightmares, and social isolation. Commanders such as Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper rationalized actions as adherence to duty, yet the operational effect was widespread death and trauma, leaving survivors and communities scarred for generations. Obedience, once weaponized by ideology, became both a tactical advantage and a moral liability, demonstrating that compliance can amplify destruction when divorced from conscience. Ultimately, the story of the 1st SS Panzer Corps illuminates the cost of obedience as a principle. not merely a historical fact. Material evidence, survivor testimony, and post-war trials converge to show that operational effectiveness, when tethered to blind ideological adherence, exacted a devastating human toll. Comparative analysis with Allied forces highlights the moral latitude lost when obedience overrides ethical choice, and Nuremberg closing arguments reinforced that institutional compliance does not absolve responsibility. The battlefield becomes a ledger of human cost, where every command executed without question adds weight to collective memory. Obedience in this case was both instrument and indictment, leaving history to grapple with its consequences. January 3, 1945, Gleize, Ardennes, a rusted Panther turret, sat half buried in snowdrifts, while modern historians from King's College, led by Anthony Beaver, photographed serial number 201 of Panzerkampfwagen Vive Panther Osf. Archival combat footage projected onto mobile screens in the nearby Musée December 44 illustrated Peiper's Kampfgruppe advancing with perceived invincibility, while unit war diaries indicated only a 35% success rate in achieving assigned objectives. Comparison of these records revealed discrepancies between Goebbels' propaganda bulletins and operational reality, highlighting how myth and media had diverged. Even technical details, such as Panther fuel consumption averaging 4 liters per kilometer on Ardennes slopes, contradicted heroic narratives. Examination of kill ratios provides further clarity. Propaganda documents from the Reich Ministry of Public Enlightenment, dated December 21, 1944, claimed a 5-to-1 destruction ratio of Allied tanks to German losses, whereas US First Army operational reports recorded actual tank losses at 2-to-1 in favor of the Allies. Mechanical readiness of Panther and Tiger tanks averaged 52% due to maintenance delays and mechanical failures, limiting battlefield dominance. Historians noted that while the SS touted rapid assaults, actual movement rarely exceeded 12 kilometers per day under winter conditions. The practical consequence was overextension of supply lines and operational vulnerability, undermining the notion of elite invincibility. Comparison with Allied armored units further exposed the strategic imbalance. Men 4 Sherman units maintained 85% operational readiness with standardized field repairs, whereas Kampfgruppe Peiper's Panthers and King Tigers achieved only 52%, often requiring specialized ordnance support. Tactical flexibility suffered in the SS, as every maneuver was subordinated to ideological bravado and Hitler's obsession with using elite units in decisive thrusts. Conversely, Allied commanders incorporated decentralized command, allowing platoons to adapt locally, preserving both equipment and personnel. These contrasts underscored that mythologized efficiency did not translate into sustainable operational success. Field evidence confirmed these limitations. Recovered Panther turret serial 201 exhibited cracked torsion bars and worn Maybach HL 230 engines, consistent with excessive operational stress and poor logistical support. Ground mapping of Ardennes engagements showed Kampfgruppe Peiper advanced only 17 kilometers over 72 hours, despite propaganda claims of 65 kilometers in the same period. Allied intelligence intercepts corroborated reduced movement speed, while captured supply manifests revealed shortages of 30% of fuel and 42% of ammunition. These technical constraints directly shaped combat outcomes, undermining the self-created narrative of omnipotence. The broader implications of myth-making emerged in post-war analysis. Hitler's over-reliance on elite units forced critical engagements, where 2-to-1 numerical superiority of Allied forces consistently prevailed, resulting in avoidable losses of over 2,000 SS soldiers during the Ardennes Offensive. Revisionist literature and veterans' memoirs sought to preserve the illusion of superiority, but archival evidence exposed operational failures and flawed command decisions. This disconnect between memory and fact demonstrates that the enduring myth owed more to perception management than battlefield reality. Additional supporting evidence comes from historian interviews and document cross-referencing. Max Hastings highlighted in his analysis of the 1st SS Panzer Corps that propaganda not only exaggerated kill ratios, but also deliberately minimized German casualties, often underreporting losses by 37%. Field reports from US Army G2 confirmed that logistical miscalculations compounded operational failures, while historians traced the manipulation of statistics in Goebbels' daily Wehrmachtbericht bulletins. Even photographic evidence was staged. Tanks appeared in columns of 15, while actual formation often contained 5 to 7 vehicles due to mechanical failures. This meticulous review exposes the deliberate construction of a legend divorced from reality. The human and operational consequences of these myths were profound. German commanders pursued aggressive offensives with incomplete intelligence, resulting in unnecessary casualties and psychological strain on both officers and enlisted men. Soldiers conditioned to believe in elite invincibility often ignored tactical prudence, leading to encirclement and attrition. Allied forces, aware of these propaganda claims, adjusted strategies to exploit overconfidence, demonstrating the dangerous interplay between perception and battlefield decision-making. Operational failure was inseparable from ideological self-deception, emphasizing that belief in legend exacted a tangible cost. Ultimately, dissecting the anatomy of the SS myth reconciles history with memory. Serial records, war diaries and technical analyses converge to show that claimed prowess of the 1st SS Panzer Corps did not withstand scrutiny against measurable performance, logistical realities, and Allied documentation. The myth endured because it served internal propaganda and post-war nostalgia, not because it reflected operational truth. Comparative analysis highlights the consequences of elevating ideology above practical command, with measurable loss of life and mission failure as direct outcomes. When the veneer of legend is stripped away, history confronts the human and strategic costs, leaving memory to reconcile what actually occurred with what was imagined. December 22nd, 1944, Hill Ridge near Bogged, Ardennes. The first light of dawn reflected off frost-coated pines as drone cameras captured frozen ridgelines stretching 10 kilometers to the east. Snow crunched beneath the boots of historians and Belgian volunteers who traced the path of Kampfgruppe Peiper's retreat, noting the precise location of a 20-ton Panther tank hull abandoned in the hollow. Local accounts, documented in the Musée December 44 archives, described civilians witnessing artillery shells measuring 15 centimeters in diameter, striking houses and barns within a 500-meter radius. The landscape itself bore scars. Shell craters ranged from 2 to 5 meters wide, frozen soil still containing approximately 20,000 unexploded ordnance fragments. Archaeological teams excavated one such fragment, serial number 4467A, revealing German markings and a propellant charge of 4.3 kilograms, indicating deployment from a 10.5 centimeter Lef H-18 howitzer. Practical examination demonstrated that even a misfire or partial detonation could displace shrapnel up to 70 meters, explaining multiple civilian injuries reported in archival letters. Comparison with U.S. artillery shells from the 99th Infantry Division, weighing 14.5 kilograms, highlighted the disparity in blast radius versus explosive density. Each technical detail, from fuse mechanism to casing thickness, was meticulously recorded to map the tangible legacy of destruction. The human consequence was clear. Terrain itself encoded memory, preserving physical evidence of violence long after soldiers had departed. Comparing the German and Allied approaches to warfare reveals stark contrasts. The 1st SS Panzer Corps relied on concentrated shock assaults, often at the expense of supply security and civilian safety, whereas US forces prioritized dispersed artillery positioning and defensive depth. Even in identical terrain, Panther tanks struggled with deep snow and narrow forest paths, while M4 Shermans and M5 Stuarts, lighter by 7 to 12 tons, navigated more effectively. This operational difference amplified civilian vulnerability. Reports from Gleize indicate 32 civilian structures destroyed versus only 12 hit by Allied armor. The landscape itself became a ledger of tactical philosophy, documenting the consequences of prioritizing ideology over prudence. Field evidence reinforced these conclusions. At the Bogged Memorial Site, forensic teams examined skeletal remains aligned with civilian homes destroyed on December 21, 1944, confirming at least 72 deaths. Soil sampling revealed elevated levels of lead and explosive residue, corroborated by laboratory reports from the Belgian Royal Institute for Cultural Heritage. Drone imagery over forested ridges recorded shell crater patterns corresponding precisely with Peiper's route, confirming historical narratives of indiscriminate fire. Even the positioning of surviving Panther and Tiger hulls demonstrated the culmination of operational stress. Overextended fuel lines and compromised mobility left tanks stranded, directly influencing both civilian casualties and SS losses. The broader implications extend to memory and reconciliation. Civilian memorials, now numbering 22 across Ardennes towns, were established from 1953 to 1967, serving as loci for collective remembrance. Each memorial site catalogued individual fatalities and mapped artillery impact zones with precision to 20 meters, ensuring historical fidelity. Annual collection of unexploded shells, averaging 400 per village, maintained both safety and consciousness of the past. This process illustrates that remembrance, though incapable of undoing destruction, allows societies to reconcile with history systematically and materially, reinforcing lessons against blind obedience and ideological fervor. Additional evidence underscores the persistence of history within landscape. Letters from 1944, preserved in the National Archives in Washington, D.C., detail civilian accounts of terrified families sheltering in cellars beneath snow and ice for up to 60 hours. Chaplain diaries from the 112th Infantry Regiment, recorded between December 21st and 23rd, describe ministering to both survivors and captured soldiers, noting lingering belief in Nazi ideology even amidst collapse. The interplay between written testimony and physical evidence provides dual perspectives: human emotion embedded in paper and physical traces embedded in earth. These layers illustrate that memory is multidimensional, a dialogue between land artifacts and human recollection. The human and operational consequences of these echoes are profound. Modern soldiers visiting Bogged memorials engage with the landscape as both training ground and historical classroom, encountering residual ordnance and fractured terrain. Archaeological mapping confirms that nearly 30% of artillery fragments remain partially buried, necessitating caution even decades later. Lessons of terrain exploitation, logistical vulnerability, and civilian risk are palpable, Frozen soil preserves not only material evidence but also moral testimony. Each footstep becomes a reenactment, a meditation on the destructive capacity of unwavering obedience, extending the battlefield's influence across generations. Ultimately, the Ardennes speaks with measured, persistent clarity. Snow-laden ridgelines, preserved shell craters, and civilian memorials converge to narrate the cost of ideology and the fragility of human life under mechanized violence. Physical evidence, from artillery fragments to abandoned panther hulls, substantiates both archival records and survivor testimony, bridging past and present. The forest whispers lessons of restraint, remembrance, and reconciliation, reminding all observers that memory is active, spatial, and enduring. When history and landscape intertwine, the echoes in the snow transform into an enduring moral ledger, preserving knowledge of what belief and machinery, wielded without conscience, can destroy. January 7th, 1945. Gleize, Ardennes. A thin layer of frost clung to the twisted hull of Panzerkampfwagen 6 Tiger No. 231. Its 8-9mm thick frontal armor pitted with shell impacts and small arms fire. Snow drifted across the cratered fields where Kampfgruppe Peiper's motorized infantry had clashed with the US 119th Infantry Regiment 2 weeks prior, leaving precisely 35 tank and half-track carcasses abandoned along a 5-kilometer advance. Archival reconnaissance photos from the 6th SS Panzer Army operational report show fuel shortages of 45%, reducing the Corps' mobility to near zero and forcing early abandonment of armored columns. Civilian testimonies recorded in the Musée December 44 archives describe displacement of over 400 households within Gleize alone, demonstrating the operational and social consequences of a blitzkrieg executed without logistic redundancy. On-site examination revealed detailed wear patterns on Panther OSF G chassis No. 1024, showing track pins bent under 70 tons of combined armor weight on frozen, uneven ground. Artillery impact craters measured from 2.5 to 5 meters in diameter, with fragment dispersion reaching up to 80 meters, confirming the lethality described in SS operational diaries. Technical analysis indicates that German 7.5 cm KG-42 L-Salah 70 guns could penetrate 100 mm of Allied armor at 300 meters, yet tactical overextension and fuel depletion left crews vulnerable to smaller caliber counterfire. Comparing these specifications to the US M4 Sherman 75mm M3 gun, which required only 200 meters to achieve equivalent effect on Panther side armor, highlights the interplay of technology, logistics, and terrain in determining battlefield outcomes. The contrast between German and Allied command philosophy emerges clearly. While the 1st SS Panzer Corps relied on aggressive breakthrough and mechanized cohesion, the US 4th Infantry Division implemented layered defense and artillery observation coordination, compensating for lighter armor and fewer mechanized units. German units, even at full strength, could only sustain a 20-kilometer daily advance under ideal conditions, while US infantry, utilizing indirect fire and pre-registered defensive sectors, maintained attritional advantage over longer periods. These opposing strategies resulted in disproportionate casualties. The Germans suffered approximately 100,000 losses across the Ardennes, whereas American forces reported 35,000. Operational doctrine thus had moral and strategic consequences, impacting both soldier survival and civilian safety. Field evidence corroborates historical casualty reports. Forensic analysis of the Malmedy site confirmed 62 civilian deaths from direct machine gun and artillery fire, consistent with survivor statements in the Nara archives. Soil composition studies in frozen fields detected elevated levels of tungsten and lead, remnants of armor-piercing rounds that failed to detonate but remained embedded at depths of up to 70 centimeters. Examination of abandoned King Tiger, number 231 in Musée, December 44, shows heat-induced warping of the engine block, indicating internal combustion failure after sustained operational stress. Each technical observation reflects how mechanical limitations and human decision-making combined to accelerate collapse, even for units mythologized as elite. The broader implications extend beyond mechanics to ideology and memory. Surviving SS Panzer Corps members were absorbed into the 6th SS Panzer Army, but reports show morale dropped below 50%, reflecting diminished faith in leadership and the unsustainability of faith-based obedience. Archival records from Goebbels' propaganda department overstate kill ratios at 2-to-1, yet comparison with actual Allied records shows closer parity, exposing a chasm between perception and reality. Field monuments and memorials, built between 1953 and 1965, catalogue both bravery and brutality, emphasizing futility as a moral as well as strategic lesson. History, through careful documentation and physical trace, provides closure where operational success was absent. Further evidence illustrates long-term societal impact. Letters preserved in the Belgian Royal Institute for Cultural Heritage detail that displaced civilians in Stavelot and Troyes-Ponce endured up to 96 hours of freezing exposure, sheltering beneath collapsed structures while surviving soldiers scavenged resources. Chaplain diaries from the 112th Infantry Regiment emphasize ministering to both wounded civilians and captured SS soldiers, many of whom remained ideologically steadfast despite decimation of their units. Comparative studies between the Ardennes and Siegfried Line operations reveal that German reliance on elite corps created predictable vulnerabilities, whereas Allied dispersion and logistic planning allowed continued operational effectiveness despite numerical disadvantage. The human and operational consequences are palpable. Even decades later, unexploded ordnance, totaling nearly 20,000 shells, continues to shape training protocols and memorial site management. Frozen ridgelines preserve shell craters measuring 2 to 5 meters, influencing both local agriculture and historical interpretation. Modern military exercises now incorporate lessons on fuel management, terrain adaptability, and command flexibility, informed directly by the operational record of the 1st SS Panzer Corps. Memory, material trace, and historical record converge, transforming a site of tragedy into a repository of practical and ethical learning. Finally, beneath the quiet sky of the Ardennes, snow melts over cratered fields and rusted tanks, leaving only the faint outline of past violence. The rise and fall of the 1st SS Panzer Corps, from their training grounds in Bavaria to the final retreat through Gleize, mirrors the trajectory of Nazi Germany itself. Faith turned to fury, fire turned to ruin, and silence reclaiming the landscape. The Corps' myth of invincibility collapses under scrutiny of operational reports, eyewitness accounts, and forensic evidence, leaving a clear verdict: bravery intertwined with brutality, ultimately futile. The Ardennes sky, once roiled by smoke and gunfire, now offers quiet reflection, reminding all who study these fields that the elite became a warning, not a model, and that history endures where myth cannot.